Everyone finds their destined mate eventually. The moon goddess never forgets her children. That's what Florence Mezza's grandmother whispered to her on cold nights when the howls of paired wolves echoed through the packlands. But Florence would learn that some wolves were meant to watch from the shadows, while others danced in the light of belonging. And when you became the only wolf in your generation without a mate bond, you learned that destiny had favorites and you weren't one of them. Chapter 1. The Outsider's Vigil. Florence Mezza stood at the edge of the gathering grounds, her fingers wrapped around a cup of untouched cider that had gone cold an hour ago. The autumn wind carried the scent of bonfire smoke, and something sweeter, the intoxicating fragrance of new mate bonds snapping into place. Around her, wolves celebrated under the harvest moon, their joy a living thing that pulsed through the clearing like a second heartbeat. She'd stopped counting after the 5th pairing tonight. "Did you see Cassie and Orlando?" a voice chirped nearby. Florence didn't turn to look. She knew the speaker, Willa Esparza, a beta female from the northern sector who'd found her mate 3 seasons ago. They're perfect together. The moon goddess really does know what she's doing. Florence's wolf whimpered inside her chest, a sound only she could hear. "Does she?" the creature seemed to ask. "Then why are we still alone?" 26 years old. In wolf years. That made her practically ancient for a mateless she-wolf. Most found their destined partners between 18 and 22. By 25, the unmated were either rare exceptions or defective. Florence knew which category the pack believed she belonged to. Floor. A hand landed on her shoulder, and Florence turned to find Samantha Jarvis beaming at her with the special glow that only newly mated wolves possessed. Sam had found her mate, a visiting wolf from the Eastern Territories, just 2 months ago. "Why are you hiding over here? Come dance with us." "I'm fine here," Florence said, forcing her lips into something resembling a smile. "Just enjoying the atmosphere." Sam's expression shifted to something that might have been pity if Florence had cared enough to examine it closely. "You know, my cousin is visiting from the Riverside Pack. He's single, and he's really nice. I could introduce you." "I'm good, Sam, really." Florence's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. She softened it with another fake smile. "I appreciate it, but I'm just here to support the pack. That's all." Sam opened her mouth to argue, but a howl cut through the night, her mate calling for her. The pull of a mate bond was impossible to resist. Sam squeezed Florence's shoulder once, her eyes apologetic, before rushing back toward the celebration center. Florence watched her go, then turned away from the gathering grounds entirely. She walked past the decorated trees hung with silver ribbons and moonflowers, past the long tables laden with food that she had no appetite for, past clusters of wolves whose happiness felt like a physical barrier she couldn't cross. The forest welcomed her with its familiar darkness. She'd walked these trails so many times over the years that her feet knew the path without guidance. This was where she came when the pack's joy became too heavy to witness, when the weight of her own missing piece threatened to crush her chest. Florence found her usual spot, a fallen log beside a creek that sang its lonely song to the night, and finally let her carefully constructed mask fall away. Her chest ached with the phantom sensation of a bond that should have been there, should have clicked into place years ago. Other wolves described it as finding the missing half of their soul. Florence only knew the hollow space where that half should fit. "You're doing it again." Florence's head snapped up. Standing on the opposite bank was Olive Austin, her closest friend since childhood and one of the few wolves who never looked at her with pity. Olive had found her mate 4 years ago, a kind-hearted male named Daniel Burke from their own pack, but she'd never abandoned Florence the way so many others had. "Doing what?" Florence asked, though she already knew. "Hiding." Olive crossed the creek in a single graceful leap and settled beside her on the log. "Running away from the celebration to torture yourself out here alone." "I'm not torturing myself. I'm giving them space to celebrate without the pack's defective she-wolf bringing down the mood." "Don't." Olive's voice turned sharp. "Don't call yourself that. You are not defective." Florence laughed, but it came out bitter. "Then what am I, Olive?" "Everyone in our generation has found their mate. Everyone except me. At some point, you have to accept the obvious. The moon goddess either forgot about me or decided I wasn't worth the effort. Or maybe your mate just hasn't crossed your path yet," Olive countered. But even she sounded less certain than usual. They'd had this conversation dozens of times over the years, and the reassurances were wearing thin. A chorus of howls erupted from the gathering grounds, another successful pairing. Florence counted 6 distinct voices joining in the celebration song. 6 more wolves who'd found their perfect match, their other half, their reason for existing. You should go back, Florence said quietly. Daniel will be wondering where you are. Daniel knows I'm checking on you. He can wait. I don't need checking on. I'm fine. Flor. I'm fine. The words came out harder than Florence intended, and she immediately regretted the flash of anger. I'm sorry. I need to be alone right now. Please. Olive studied her for a long moment, her hazel eyes too knowing, too kind. Finally she stood. The pack meeting is tomorrow night. Alpha Scott is supposed to make some kind of announcement. Will you be there? Florence nodded, not trusting her voice. Okay, I'll see you then. Olive hesitated, then added, You know, being mateless doesn't make you less. You're still one of the strongest wolves I know. Don't forget that. Then she was gone, leaving Florence alone with the creek and the distant sounds of celebration that felt worlds away. Florence sat there for hours, watching the moon track across the sky. She'd memorized every phase, every shadow on its surface. The moon goddess supposedly lived there, watching over all her children, guiding mates to each other with invisible threads of fate. Why not me? Florence asked the silent deity. What did I do wrong? The moon offered no answers, just its cold, indifferent light. As midnight approached, Florence finally stood and made her way back toward the packlands. The celebration had wound down, most wolves having paired off literally for the night. She passed a few stragglers heading home, their faces flushed with happiness and fermented berry wine. No one noticed her. She'd become quite good at being invisible. Her small cabin sat on the outskirts of the main settlement, far enough away that she didn't have to hear the sounds of mated couples every night. It had been her grandmother's home before the old she-wolf passed 3 years ago, leaving Florence truly alone in the world. Her parents had died in a border skirmish when she was young, and her grandmother had raised her with stories of destined love and fated bonds. Your mate is out there, little moon, grandmother would say. And when you find him, everything will finally make sense. All the pain, all the waiting, it will all be worth it. Florence unlocked her door and stepped into the dark cabin. She didn't bother lighting a lamp. The darkness felt appropriate. She changed into sleep clothes and crawled into her empty bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. Through the window, the harvest moon watched her with its unblinking eye. Tomorrow there would be a pack meeting. Tomorrow she would put on her mask again, pretend she didn't notice the whispers, pretend she didn't feel the weight of dozens of pitying glances. Tomorrow she would be strong and self-sufficient, and perfectly fine with her solitary existence. But tonight, in the privacy of her grandmother's cabin, Florence let herself cry. She cried for the mate she'd never meet, for the bond she'd never feel, for the life she'd never have. She cried until her pillow was soaked and her throat was raw, and her wolf had retreated to the deepest corner of her mind, too wounded to offer comfort. Outside, the world slept peacefully, wrapped in the warmth of connection and belonging. Inside, Florence Meza faced another night alone. Chapter 2. When Golden Eyes noticed. The pack meeting hall buzzed with an energy that Florence had rarely witnessed in her 26 years. Wolves crowded the wooden benches, their voices rising in speculation and excitement. Something big was happening, she could taste it in the air, sharp and electric like the moment before lightning strikes. Florence slipped into her usual spot at the back, far from the center stage where Alpha Scott Gaines would make his announcement. She preferred the shadows, the places where she could observe without being observed. I heard it's about the Alpha King. A young wolf whispered behind her. No way. Why would the Alpha King care about our little pack? Another responded. My father said something about the gathering of alphas. Maybe we're hosting it this year. Florence's ears perked up despite herself. The gathering of alphas happened once every 5 years, a massive convergence of pack leaders from across the territories. It was political theater mixed with ancient tradition, a chance for alliances to form and power structures to shift. Their pack had never been important enough to host such an event. The room fell silent as Alpha Scott entered through the main doors, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked 3 wolves that Florence didn't recognize, their bearing too proud, their clothes too fine, their scents too powerful to be from any nearby pack. And then he entered. Florence's wolf, who had been dormant and wounded since last night, suddenly surged to attention inside her chest. The air itself seemed to shift, bending around the figure who stepped through the doorway with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to command. He was tall, taller than any wolf she'd ever seen, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and dark hair that caught the lamplight. But it was his eyes that trapped her attention. Even from across the crowded room, she could see they were an unusual shade of amber, almost gold, and they swept across the assembled pack with an intensity that made her breath catch. This was no ordinary alpha. This was the Alpha King. Pack, Alpha Scott's voice rang out, and the murmuring ceased entirely. I present to you King Jared Moran, ruler of the Northern Territories and leader of the Council of Alphas. The pack rose as one, heads bowing in respect. Florence followed suit, her heart hammering against her ribs in a way she couldn't explain. She'd never seen the Alpha King before. Few wolves outside the highest-ranking families ever did. He was more legend than reality, a figure whispered about in stories of brutal justice and unmatched power. At ease, the Alpha King's voice carried across the hall effortlessly, deep and commanding. The pack settled back into their seats. I apologize for the short notice of my visit. I come bearing news that affects all packs in our territories. Florence risked a glance upward. The Alpha King stood at the center of the platform, his 3 companions, likely his beta and guards, flanking him at a respectful distance. Alpha Scott looked almost small beside him, despite being a powerful wolf in his own right. In 3 weeks' time, the Northern Territories will host the Gathering of Alphas, King Jared continued. This year's gathering will be different from those in the past. We face threats from rogue factions, challenges to our established borders, and internal conflicts that threaten to fracture our unity. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Florence felt it echo in her own chest. To strengthen our bonds, both political and literal, I am reinstating an ancient tradition. The Alpha King's gaze swept the room again, and for one heart-stopping moment, Florence could have sworn those golden eyes landed directly on her before moving on. The mate ceremony of the gathering. Excited whispers erupted immediately. Florence had read about the mate ceremony in her grandmother's old books, a tradition from centuries past where unmated wolves from different packs would gather, hoping to find their destined partners among wolves they might never have otherwise encountered. It had been discontinued over 200 years ago, when packs became more interconnected and travel between territories increased. Any unmated wolf over the age of 21 may attend, the Alpha King announced. This includes alphas, betas, and pack members of all ranks. The ceremony will take place on the 3rd night of the gathering, under the full moon. Florence's heart began to race. A ceremony specifically for unmated wolves. A gathering of wolves from dozens of packs, from territories spanning thousands of miles. If her mate existed somewhere in the world, wouldn't this be the place to find him? Hope, that dangerous and fragile thing, flickered to life in her chest. Alpha Scott has agreed to send representatives from your pack, King Jared continued. Any wolf who wishes to participate must register with your alpha within the next week. The journey to the gathering grounds will take 10 days, and I will personally ensure safe passage for all attendees. The meeting dissolved into chaos, as wolves turned to each other, voices rising in excitement and speculation. Florence sat frozen in her seat, her mind spinning with possibilities. This could be it, her wolf whispered. This could be our chance. But even as hope bloomed, doubt crept in like frost. What if she attended and still found no one? What if she stood in a room full of unmated wolves and remained alone? Wouldn't that be the final proof that she was truly defective, truly unwanted even by fate itself? Florence. She jerked her head up to find Olive standing beside her bench, Daniel at her side. Are you going to register? I don't know, Florence admitted. You have to, Olive insisted, her eyes bright with excitement. This is exactly what you've been waiting for. A real chance to find your mate. Or a real chance to confirm I don't have one, Florence countered quietly. Daniel, usually quiet and thoughtful, spoke up. If you don't go, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what if. At least if you attend, you'll know for certain. Florence opened her mouth to respond, but movement on the platform caught her attention. The Alpha King was descending the stairs, his companions following. He moved through the crowd, and wolves parted before him like water around stone. He stopped to speak with a few pack members, his expression pleasant but distant, and then he was walking in her direction. Florence's breath caught in her throat. Surely he wasn't coming toward her. Why would the Alpha King single out an unremarkable, mateless she-wolf in a crowd of hundreds? But his path didn't waver. Those golden eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place, a butterfly mounted in a collector's case. The noise of the crowd faded to a dull roar in her ears. He stopped directly in front of her bench. Up close, he was even more imposing. Power radiated from him in waves that made her wolf want to simultaneously submit and stand proud. His scent hit her pine and winter storms and something wild that spoke of vast territories and ancient bloodlines. "You're unmated," he said. It wasn't a question. Florence's mouth went dry. She managed a nod, acutely aware that every wolf in their vicinity had gone silent, watching this unexpected interaction. "Will you attend the ceremony?" Again, not really a question. But there was something in his voice, a genuine curiosity. Perhaps that suggested he actually cared about her answer. "I haven't decided, Your Majesty," Florence heard herself say. Surprised, her voice came out steady. Something flickered in those golden eyes. Amusement? Intrigue? "And what holds you back?" The honest answer rose to her lips before she could stop it. "Fear that even surrounded by unmated wolves from every territory, I'll still be alone." The silence around them deepened. Wolves didn't speak so openly about their fears, especially not to the Alpha King himself, but Florence had spent too many years hiding her truth. If she was going to be judged as defective, let it be for who she actually was. The Alpha King studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, his lips curved into something that might have been respect. "Honesty," he said. "How rare." He extended his hand, a gesture so unexpected that Florence stared at it for several heartbeats before understanding he meant for her to take it. "If you attend the ceremony and find yourself still alone, I extend this invitation now. Choose me." The hall erupted. Wolves gasped, whispered. Some even laughed in disbelief. The Alpha King didn't make casual offers. The Alpha King, who could have any she-wolf in any territory, had just offered himself as a choice to a nobody from a minor pack. Florence's hand trembled as she placed it in his. His palm was warm, calloused, and when their skin touched, something electric passed between them. Not a mate bond, but something else. Recognition, perhaps. A connection she couldn't name. "Why?" she whispered, the question for him alone. His grip tightened slightly, his golden eyes holding hers. "Because any she-wolf brave enough to voice her deepest fear to a king deserves better than loneliness." He released her hand and stepped back. "I hope to see you at the gathering, Florence Meza." He knew her name. Somehow, the Alpha King knew her name. Before she could process this impossible fact, he was moving away, rejoining his companions near the platform. Alpha Scott looked stunned. The entire pack looked stunned. And Florence sat frozen on her bench, her hands still tingling from his touch, her mind reeling from what had just happened. Did that really just happen? Olive breathed beside her. Florence couldn't answer. She stared at her hand, at the place where the Alpha King's skin had touched hers, and felt the fragile wings of hope beating frantically against the cage of her ribs. The Alpha King had extended his hand and offered her a choice. Not a mate bond, perhaps, but something she'd never had before. An option. A possibility. A reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to be alone forever. The meeting continued around her, but Florence heard none of it. She sat in the back row of benches, her world tilted on its axis, and tried to understand what had just changed. "Everything," whispered her wolf. "Everything has changed." Chapter 3. The Weight of Possibility. Florence didn't sleep that night. How could she? When her mind replayed the same moment over and over, the Alpha King's hand extended toward her, his golden eyes holding a challenge and something else she couldn't name. His words echoing in the darkness of her cabin. "Choose me." By dawn, the entire pack knew what had happened. By mid-morning, Florence couldn't walk to the communal well without wolves staring at her with expressions ranging from envy to disbelief to barely concealed hostility. "I heard she threw herself at him," someone whispered as Florence passed. "Probably used some kind of spell. My grandmother always said the Mezzaline had witch blood." The Alpha King was just being polite. He'd never actually. Florence kept walking, her spine straight and her face carefully blank. She'd had years of practice ignoring whispers. What was a few more? But when she reached her cabin door and found Carmela Reynolds waiting on her porch, Florence knew her day was about to get significantly worse. Carmela was Alpha Scott's daughter and widely considered the most beautiful she-wolf in the pack. Golden hair that cascaded down her back in perfect waves, blue eyes that sparkled like summer lakes, and a figure that made male wolves stumble over their own feet. She'd found her mate 2 years ago, a strong beta male named Jesse Connor, but that had never stopped her from collecting admirers like trinkets. "Florence," Carmela's voice dripped with false sweetness. "I wanted to talk to you about yesterday." "There's nothing to talk about," Florence replied, moving to step around her. Carmela shifted, blocking the door. Oh, I think there is. See, I'm concerned about you. About how you might have misunderstood the Alpha King's kindness. I didn't misunderstand anything. Are you sure? Carmela's smile sharpened. Because it seemed like you might have gotten the wrong idea. The Alpha King was being polite, Florence. He felt sorry for you, the poor, mateless wolf everyone pities. It was a charitable gesture. Nothing more. Each word landed like a small cut, designed to wound without leaving visible marks. Florence had endured worse from Carmela over the years, the casual cruelty that beautiful, mated wolves inflicted on those they considered beneath them. If you're done, Florence said evenly, I'd like to enter my own home. I'm trying to help you, Carmela insisted, her voice taking on a concerned tone that would have sounded genuine to anyone who didn't know her. I don't want you to embarrass yourself at the gathering. Or worse, embarrass our pack. When you show up, and the Alpha King doesn't even remember making that ridiculous offer, he'll remember. The words came out before Florence could stop them, firm and certain in a way that surprised even herself. Carmela's eyes narrowed. You really believe that? You think someone like him would ever choose someone like you? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. Look at yourself, Florence. You're nobody. You have no rank, no family, no mate bond. You're the wolf everyone forgets is even there. What could you possibly offer an Alpha King? For years, Florence had absorbed words like these. She'd let them sink into her skin, had believed them on her darkest nights when loneliness felt like drowning. But something had shifted yesterday when the Alpha King looked at her with those golden eyes and saw something worth acknowledging. I don't know, Florence answered honestly. But he saw something. And that's more than you or anyone else in this pack has ever bothered to look for. She pushed past Carmela and entered her cabin, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the wooden planks, she heard Carmela's sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone unaccustomed to being dismissed. You'll regret this, Carmela called through the door. When you're standing alone at the gathering while wolves with actual worth find their mates, you'll wish you'd listened to me. Florence leaned against the door, her heart pounding. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for herself. Her wolf purred with approval. 3 days passed before Florence made her decision. 3 days of whispers and sideways glances. Of Olive's enthusiastic encouragement and Daniel's quiet support. Of lying awake at night, weighing hope against the crushing possibility of final disappointment. On the 4th morning, she walked to Alpha Scott's office and knocked. Enter, came the gruff response. Alpha Scott looked up from his desk, his weathered face creasing into surprise when he saw her. Florence. I wondered if you'd come. I want to register for the gathering, Florence said without preamble. For the mate ceremony. The Alpha studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he pulled out a leather-bound ledger and opened it to a page already half filled with names. Florence caught sight of several she recognized young wolves who'd recently come of age. A few older wolves like herself who'd been waiting years for their mates. And there, near the top in Carmela's distinctive handwriting, Carmela Reynolds. Florence's stomach dropped. Carmela's already mated. Why would she? She claims her mate bond is weak. Alpha, Scott said carefully, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe it himself. Says she wants to see if there's a stronger connection waiting for her at the gathering. Which meant Carmela intended to pursue the Alpha King. Of course she did. A chance to trade up from a beta male to the most powerful wolf in the territories? Carmela would never pass that up. Does Jesse know? Florence asked. Alpha Scott's silence was answer enough. Florence took the pen he offered and signed her name below the others, her handwriting plain and unremarkable compared to Carmela's flourishes. When do we leave? 1 week. The journey will take 10 days on foot, possibly 8 if we shift and run. He closed the ledger. Florence. About what the Alpha King said. You understand it was likely just a polite gesture? I don't want you to build your hopes on. I understand, Florence interrupted, though she wasn't sure she did. Wasn't sure she wanted to. Thank you, Alpha. She left before he could say anything else that might crack the fragile shell of determination she'd built around herself. The week before departure passed in a blur of preparation. Florence packed light a change of clothes, her grandmother's silver pendant, a small leather journal where she'd recorded her thoughts since childhood. She had little else worth bringing. Olive helped her prepare, chattering excitedly about the gathering, as if she herself were attending. I heard the Alpha King's territory spans 3 mountain ranges. Can you imagine? And the pack house is supposed to be like a palace, with ballrooms and… Olive. Florence cut in gently. I'm not going there to see palaces. I'm going to find my mate, if I have one. When you find him, Olive corrected firmly. She grabbed Florence's hands, her expression turning serious. You deserve this, Flor. You deserve happiness and love and a mate who sees how incredible you are. Don't let anyone, especially not Carmela Reynolds, make you doubt that. Florence squeezed her friend's hands, emotion tightening her throat. What if I come back still mateless? What if this is it? My last real chance. And I fail. Then you'll know you tried. And you'll still have me, and Daniel, and a life worth living even without a mate bond. Olive's eyes glistened. But I don't think that's going to happen. I have a feeling about this. Gathering Flor. Something tells me your whole life is about to change. Florence wanted to believe her. Wanted to let that hope fill her chest without the accompanying dread of disappointment. But she'd learned to protect herself with realism, with low expectations that couldn't shatter and cut her when they fell. Still, as she packed her grandmother's pendant, the one engraved with the phases of the moon, she allowed herself a whisper of possibility. Maybe, she thought, just maybe. The morning of departure arrived with autumn rain and gray skies. 23 wolves from their pack would make the journey to the gathering, 19 unmated wolves seeking the ceremony, plus 4 escorts including Alpha Scott himself. Florence stood at the edge of the forest where the pack had gathered, her traveling cloak pulled tight against the drizzle. Around her, excited chatter filled the air as young wolves said goodbye to their families. Carmela stood at the center of attention as always, her goodbye to Jesse dramatic enough that several wolves watched with poorly concealed interest. Jesse himself looked hollow, his eyes haunted. Florence felt a pang of sympathy for him. Whatever game Carmela was playing, he was the one who would pay the price. All right. Alpha Scott's voice rang out. We have a long journey ahead. Stay together. Watch out for each other. And remember you represent our pack at this gathering. Conduct yourselves with honor. They shifted as one, clothes falling away as fur and fangs emerged. Florence's wolf form was unremarkable brown fur with lighter patches, average size, nothing that would catch anyone's eye. She'd always envied wolves like Carmela, whose wolf forms were as striking as their human ones, all golden beauty and graceful power. But her wolf was strong and fast, and that would have to be enough. The pack moved out in formation, Alpha Scott at the lead with the escorts flanking the group of unmated wolves. They ran through territories Florence had never seen, crossed rivers that sang different songs than the creek near her cabin, passed through forests thick with ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of wolf history. On the third day, as they stopped to rest near a waterfall, Florence found herself sitting alone on a moss-covered rock. She'd pulled out her grandmother's journal, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Is that a diary? Florence looked up to find Samantha Jarvis settling beside her, slightly out of breath from the run. Sam had registered for the ceremony after her mate bond broke unexpectedly last month. A rare and devastating occurrence that left her reeling. My grandmother's, Florence answered. She wrote about her own journey to find her mate. I like reading it sometimes, remembering that she found him eventually, that happy endings are possible. Sam was quiet for a moment, staring at the waterfall's cascade. Do you really think we'll find them? Our mates? I don't know, Florence admitted. But I think we have to try. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Sam nodded slowly. The Alpha King's offer to you. Was that real? Or was everyone right that he was just being kind? Florence had asked herself that question 100 times. I guess I'll find out at the gathering. I hope he meant it, Sam said softly. I hope someone sees you the way you deserve to be seen. You've been alone too long, Flor. Before Florence could respond, Carmela's voice cut through the clearing. Alpha Scott says we're moving out in 5 minutes. Stop dawdling. Sam rolled her eyes but stood. Florence carefully tucked the journal back into her pack and prepared to shift again. As they ran through the afternoon, the landscape began to change. The trees grew taller, the air crisper. They were entering the Northern Territories, the Alpha King's domain, and with each mile that passed, Florence felt the weight of possibility pressing down on her chest like a stone. In 7 days, she would stand under the full moon at the gathering. In 7 days, she would learn if fate had a mate waiting for her somewhere in the crowd of unmated wolves. And in 7 days, she might have to face the Alpha King again, and discover if his offer had been real or just a moment of charitable kindness that he'd already forgotten. Her wolf pushed forward, running faster than necessary, as if trying to outpace the fear that nipped at their heels. Behind them, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Chapter 4, where thousands gathered to belong. The Alpha King's territory was unlike anything Florence had ever seen. Mountains pierced the sky like ancient teeth, their peaks crowned with snow that never melted even in summer. Forests so dense they seemed to breathe, valleys that cradled crystal lakes, and everywhere the scent of power so concentrated it made her wolf's hackles rise in instinctive submission. They'd been traveling for 9 days when the gathering grounds finally came into view. Florence stopped at the edge of a cliff overlook, her breath catching in her throat. Below them, spread across a valley that must have been 5 miles wide, was a temporary city of tents and pavilions. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, in every color imaginable. Banners representing different packs snapped in the mountain wind. And even from this distance, she could see wolves moving between the structures, like ants in a disturbed nest. "Sweet Moon Goddess," Sam breathed beside her. "How many packs are here?" "All of them," Alpha Scott answered, his voice tight with something between awe and unease. "Every pack in the Northern Territories, and some from beyond. I've never seen a gathering this large." Florence's eyes tracked to the center of the valley, where a massive structure rose above the tent city. A palace built of white stone that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. It was temporary, she knew, constructed specifically for the gathering and dismantled afterward, but it looked eternal, ancient, like something out of the old stories her grandmother used to tell. That was where the Alpha King lived. Where he held court, made decisions that affected thousands of wolves, and in 3 days where he would host the mate ceremony. "Come on," Alpha Scott said, starting down the winding path that led into the valley. "We need to claim our camp space before the good spots are taken." The pack followed, and with each step closer, Florence felt her anxiety ratchet higher. This was real. This was actually happening. In 3 days, she would either find her mate or face the crushing reality that she had none. Or she would have to decide whether to accept the Alpha King's offer if it still stood. They entered the tent city through an organized chaos that somehow made sense. Wolves from different packs nodded to each other in passing. Territorial instincts held in check by ancient gathering laws. Fighting was forbidden on these grounds, as was any violence between packs. Violators would face the Alpha King's justice, and from what Florence had heard, that was not a fate anyone wanted. Their pack was assigned a section on the eastern edge of the valley, near a stream that provided fresh water. It was a decent location. If not prestigious, they were a small pack, after all, without significant political influence. As they began setting up tents, Florence noticed Carmela watching the palace in the distance with naked hunger in her eyes. The beautiful she-wolf had barely spoken to anyone during the journey, too focused on whatever plans she was hatching. "She's going to make a play for him," Olive had warned before Florence left. "Just be ready." Florence was trying to be ready, but how did you prepare to compete with someone like Carmela Reynolds? Someone who looked like she'd been sculpted by the moon goddess herself as an example of perfect wolf femininity. "Stop that," Sam said quietly, appearing at Florence's elbow. She'd been staying close during the journey, the two unmated wolves finding comfort in each other's company. "Stop comparing yourself to her." "I wasn't." "Yes, you were. I could see it on your face." Sam's expression was kind but firm. "You're doing the thing where you decide you're not enough, before anyone even has a chance to disagree." Florence looked down at her hands, rough and calloused from years of work. "It's hard not to when she's that." "She's beautiful on the outside," Sam agreed. "But beauty isn't everything, you know that better than anyone." Before Florence could respond, a howl echoed across the valley, 3 short bursts followed by one long note. The call of the Alpha King's messengers. "Attention all packs." A voice boomed, amplified somehow to carry across the entire gathering grounds. "The welcoming feast will be held tonight, in the Great Hall. All alphas and pack representatives are required to attend. Unmated wolves seeking the ceremony are invited but not required." Florence's stomach clenched. A feast, tonight, where the Alpha King would presumably be present. "You're going," Sam said firmly, reading her hesitation. "I don't know if..." "You're going," Sam repeated. "We both are. We didn't come all this way to hide in our tents." The Great Hall was every bit as magnificent as Florence had feared. Vaulted ceilings that seemed to touch the clouds, walls hung with tapestries depicting wolf history going back centuries, and a central feasting space that could easily accommodate 1,000 wolves. Florence had borrowed a dress from one of the pack's beta females, a simple thing in deep green that brought out the few gold flecks in her brown eyes. It was the nicest piece of clothing she'd ever worn, and she still felt hopelessly underdressed compared to the elegant wolves swirling around the hall. Carmela had somehow produced a gown that looked like it cost more than Florence's cabin. Midnight blue silk that clung to her curves and sparkled with what might have been actual diamonds. She'd positioned herself strategically near the center of the hall, where she was already collecting admirers like flowers collect bees. "Don't look at her," Sam muttered, tugging Florence toward one of the food tables. "Look at all this food instead. Have you ever seen this many dishes in one place?" She hadn't. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh breads, fruits Florence couldn't name, and desserts that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Her stomach growled they'd been eating travel rations for 9 days. And this feast was almost overwhelming in its abundance. They'd just filled their plates when the hall fell silent. Florence didn't need to turn to know who had entered. She could feel it, the shift in the air, the way every wolf's attention pivoted toward the main entrance like flowers turning toward the sun. The Alpha King had arrived. He wore black, simple but clearly expensive, and he moved through the crowd with that same easy confidence Florence remembered from the pack meeting. His 3 companions flanked him. She now knew they were his beta, Evan Murphy, and 2 of his personal guards, Toby Mullins and Francis Bond. King Jared made his way to the raised platform at the head of the hall, acknowledging various alphas with nods as he passed. He didn't look at the crowd of hopeful she-wolves tracking his every movement. He didn't seem to notice Carmela, despite her positioning herself directly in his path. But when those golden eyes swept the room and landed on Florence standing half-hidden behind a decorative pillar, they stopped. Held. Florence froze, her plate forgotten in her hands. Across the vast hall, through the crowd of hundreds of wolves, the Alpha King looked directly at her. And then impossibly he smiled. Just a slight curve of his lips, but unmistakable. He remembered. He'd actually remembered. The moment broke as other alphas demanded his attention, but Florence's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. "Did that just happen?" Sam whispered urgently. "Did the Alpha King just smile at you?" I think so. Oh my goddess. Florence, this is..." Whatever Sam was about to say was cut off as Carmela appeared before them, her expression thunderous despite the sweet smile fixed on her face. "Florence," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby wolves to hear. "I see you decided to attend after all. How brave of you." The words were designed to sound like a compliment but landed like an insult. Several wolves nearby turned to watch the exchange with interest. "Why wouldn't I attend?" Florence asked evenly. "Oh, no reason. I just thought after the long journey, you might be too tired." Carmela's eyes raked over Florence's borrowed dress with barely concealed disdain. "Though I suppose some wolves have more stamina than others." "Carmela," Sam interjected, her voice sharp. "Isn't your mate wondering where you are?" Carmela's smile turned brittle. "Jessie understands that I need to explore all my options. After all, the moon goddess sometimes makes mistakes with mate bonds. It's important to correct them when possible." "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes," Florence said quietly. "Are you sure?" Carmela leaned in, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper meant only for Florence and Sam. "Because she certainly made one with you. 26 years old and still mateless? That's not bad luck, Florence. That's a message." The words struck exactly where Carmela intended, at the deepest wound Florence carried. But before she could formulate a response, a presence appeared at her shoulder that made every wolf in their vicinity immediately bow their heads. "Am I interrupting?" The Alpha King's voice was calm, pleasant even, but there was an edge beneath it that suggested he'd heard at least part of the exchange. Florence's breath caught as she turned to find him standing directly beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Up close, he was even more imposing than she remembered. Taller, broader, with those golden eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense to truth. "Your Majesty," Carmela practically purred, executing a perfect curtsy that showed off her figure to maximum advantage. "What an honor." "I was speaking to Florence," the Alpha King said without looking at Carmela. His eyes remained fixed on Florence, something unreadable in their depths. "I came to see if she'd made a decision about my offer." The hall around them had gone deathly quiet. Florence was dimly aware of hundreds of eyes watching this exchange, of Carmela's face paling with shock and fury, of Sam's hand squeezing her arm in support. Florence's voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. I'm still deciding, Your Majesty. Jared, he corrected. And what factors into your decision? This was surreal. The Alpha King Jared was standing in the middle of his own feast, asking her about her decision-making process as if they were the only two wolves in the room. Florence decided honesty had served her well so far. I'm trying to determine if you were serious or simply being kind. His lips curved into a fuller smile, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval. I'm rarely kind without purpose. And I never make offers I don't intend to honor. He extended his hand exactly as he had at the pack meeting. Dance with me. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. It was an invitation that felt like a test. Florence glanced at his hand, then back at his face. Every wolf in the hall was watching. Carmela looked like she might shatter from rage. This would cement Florence as a target, would make her the subject of gossip and speculation for the entire gathering. But the Alpha King Jared was looking at her like he actually wanted her to say yes. Like her answer mattered. Florence set down her plate and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and he led her to the center of the hall where couples had already begun to dance. The musicians, sensing the importance of the moment, shifted to a slower melody. Jared pulled her into the proper dancing position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. He moved with the same fluid grace he brought to everything else, and Florence found herself following his lead more easily than she'd expected. You look terrified, he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I am, she admitted. I have no idea what's happening right now. I'm dancing with someone I find interesting. That's what's happening. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why me? You could have any she-wolf here. Most of them are more beautiful, better connected, more willing to lie? Jared interrupted. More interested in my title than my character? More concerned with what they can gain than who I actually am? Florence met his eyes, startled by the bitterness she heard beneath his words. You don't understand what it's like, he continued, spinning her gently. Being Alpha King means everyone wants something from you. Power, protection, prestige. No one just wants you. That must be lonely, Florence said softly. Jared's hand tightened slightly at her waist. It is. Which is why when I meet someone who speaks honestly, even if that honesty is uncomfortable, it stands out. His golden eyes bore into hers. You told me you were afraid of being alone, even surrounded by others. That fear is real, and you didn't try to dress it up or make it more palatable. I'm not good at pretending, Florence admitted. I know. That's why I'm dancing with you instead of anyone else. The song ended too soon. Jared stepped back, bowing slightly, a gesture of respect that sent another ripple of shock through the watching crowd. Alpha Kings didn't bow to anyone, let alone unmated she-wolves from minor packs. The ceremony is in 3 days, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. If you reach the end of that night and still find yourself alone, my offer stands. I won't force anything, not a mate bond, not a relationship, nothing, but I will offer you a choice. Partnership with someone who understands loneliness. Companionship without the pressure of forced affection. He started to turn away, then paused. And Florence? The she-wolf in the blue dress, who's been trying to catch my eye all night? She's beautiful, yes. But beauty without substance is just decoration. I have enough decorations. Then he was gone, moving back through the crowd to speak with various alphas, leaving Florence standing in the center of the dance floor with her heart racing and her mind spinning. Sam appeared at her side immediately. What did he say? Flor, what just happened? But Florence couldn't answer. She was staring at her hand, the one Jared had held, and trying to process what felt like a fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. The Alpha King saw her, actually saw her. Not as a pitiable mateless wolf, not as a decorative object, but as someone worth knowing. And in 3 days, she would discover if the moon goddess had a mate waiting for her in the crowd of unmated wolves. But if she didn't, she now had a choice, a real choice. And somehow, that made all the difference. Chapter 5. When Beauty Demands Proof. The day after the feast, Florence woke to find herself the subject of intense scrutiny from nearly every wolf at the gathering. Whispers followed her wherever she walked. Some wolves looked at her with curiosity, others with envy, and more than a few with outright hostility. Carmela had apparently decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. Did you hear? Her voice carried across the communal breakfast area. where wolves from different packs mingled. Florence Meza from the minor packs somehow convinced the Alpha King to pity her. Such a clever manipulation, playing on his sympathy by acting pathetic. Florence kept her head down, focusing on her breakfast. Sam sat beside her, radiating protective fury. "She's going to pay for this," Sam muttered. "I swear on the moon goddess." "Leave it," Florence said quietly. "She's trying to provoke a reaction. Don't give her one." But provocation seemed to be Carmela's new strategy. Throughout the morning, she positioned herself wherever Florence went, her comments just loud enough to be overheard, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. I wonder what she promised him. Wolves that desperate will do anything. Poor thing. She really thinks he meant it as more than charity. At least when the ceremony proves she has no mate, she'll have her pity partnership to fall back on. Each barb landed, but Florence had spent 26 years building armor against exactly this kind of cruelty. She wouldn't give Carmela the satisfaction of seeing her break. What she hadn't expected was for the Alpha King himself to address it. A messenger arrived at their camp just after midday, bearing the Alpha King's seal. "Florence Meza is summoned to the palace for afternoon tea with His Majesty." The camp erupted into chaos. Alpha Scott looked stunned. Sam squealed with excitement. And Carmela's face went through several shades of red before settling on a sickly pale. "This is inappropriate," Carmela sputtered. "She's not even—" "The Alpha King's summons are not subject to approval," the messenger said coolly. "Florence Meza, you're expected within the hour. Someone will escort you to appropriate attire." Florence stood on shaking legs. Yes. Of course." The appropriate attire turned out to be a private chamber in the palace, where 3 she-wolves waited with an array of dresses that made Florence's borrowed green gown look like burlap. They were efficient and kind, helping her into a soft cream-colored dress with delicate embroidery along the hem and sleeves. The king specifically requested something understated. One of them explained, pinning Florence's hair into a simple but elegant style. He said, and I quote, "Nothing that would make her uncomfortable." Florence stared at her reflection in the polished mirror. She still didn't look like Carmela or the other stunning she-wolves at the gathering, but she looked presentable. Maybe even pretty. In a quiet sort of way. A guard escorted her through the palace, a maze of white stone corridors hung with tapestries and lit by what appeared to be captured sunlight in crystal spheres. Finally, they reached a private garden where a table had been set with tea service and small delicacies. The Alpha King Jared stood with his back to her, looking out over the valley where the tent city sprawled. He was dressed more casually than at the feast, in simple dark clothes that somehow made him look more approachable and more dangerous all at once. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "I wasn't certain you would." "You summoned me," Florence pointed out. "I'm not sure I had a choice." He turned then, his golden eyes finding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You always have a choice, Florence. Even with a king's summons, you could have refused." He gestured to the table. "Please, sit." Florence settled into the chair he held out for her, hyper-aware of how close he was, how his scent pine and winter storms seemed to wrap around her. He took the seat across from her and poured tea with surprising grace for someone with such large hands. "I heard about this morning," he said, his tone conversational but with an edge beneath it. "The comments, the speculation. I apologize. My attention has made you a target." "It's not your fault," Florence said automatically. "Isn't it?" He set down the teapot and leaned back, studying her. "I invited scrutiny by singling you out. I should have anticipated the consequences." Florence wrapped her hands around her teacup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Why did you single me out, I mean? I still don't understand." Jared was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone?" "Yes," Florence whispered. "I know exactly what that's like. I thought you might." He met her gaze again. "I became Alpha King at 23. I inherited my father's position, his territories, his conflicts, and his enemies. And overnight, everyone who'd known me as simply Jared started treating me like a title instead of a person." Florence could hear the loneliness in his voice, the same ache that lived in her own chest. "Every she-wolf who approaches me wants the crown, not the wolf wearing it," Jared continued. "Every conversation is calculated, every gesture political. I'm a prize to be won, a connection to be exploited. No one just talks to me." "I talked to you," Florence said softly. "You did. You told me you were afraid. You didn't flirt or flatter or try to impress me. You were just honest. He smiled, and it transformed his face from imposing to almost boyish. It was refreshing. Florence took a sip of her tea, trying to organize her thoughts. So this is, what? A friendship? I don't know what this is, Jared admitted. But I'd like to find out. If you're willing. Before Florence could respond, a commotion erupted from somewhere in the palace. Raised voices, the sound of a scuffle, and then Beta Evan burst into the garden with 3 guards. Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, Evan said, slightly out of breath. But we have a situation. Jared's entire demeanor shifted from the almost vulnerable wolf sharing tea to the commanding alpha king. What kind of situation? A challenge has been issued. One of the visiting wolves has invoked the trial of worth. Florence saw Jared's jaw clench. On what grounds? The challenger claims that your attention toward Florence Meza is inappropriate given her lack of rank and status. She's demanding the right to prove herself the superior choice through traditional trials. Florence's stomach dropped. She didn't need to ask who had issued the challenge. Carmela Reynolds, she said flatly. Evan nodded, his expression sympathetic. She's gathered quite a crowd. Half the gathering is in the main courtyard waiting to see how this plays out. Jared looked at Florence, something fierce and protective flashing in his golden eyes. You don't have to accept. The trial of worth is an ancient tradition, rarely invoked. You can refuse without consequence. What happens if I refuse? Florence asked. Nothing, Jared said firmly. Absolutely nothing changes. But Evan shifted uncomfortably, and Florence caught it. Except people will say you're afraid, Evan admitted reluctantly. That you know you're unworthy and won't face legitimate competition. It will validate certain narratives about your relationship with the king. Florence set down her teacup carefully. Her hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. What does the trial of worth involve? Florence, no. Jared started. Tell me, she insisted, meeting his eyes. Please. Jared stood and began pacing, his movements tight with controlled anger. The trial of worth consists of 3 challenges designed to test different aspects of value to a pack. Traditionally, it was used when multiple she-wolves sought the same high-ranking male. It's barbaric and outdated, but still legally binding under gathering law, Evan added quietly. Florence's mind raced. She could refuse and spend the rest of the gathering and possibly her life known as the wolf who was too scared to compete. Or she could accept and almost certainly lose to Carmela, who was everything Florence was not. Beautiful, confident, connected. What are the 3 challenges? She asked. Jared stopped pacing. Florence. What are they? She repeated, steel entering her voice. He said, recognizing the determination in her expression. The trial of strength, which can be combat or a test of physical prowess. The trial of wisdom, which involves solving complex problems or riddles, and the trial of heart, which tests character and values. He moved closer, his voice urgent. Carmela will have chosen challenges that play to her strengths. This is a trap. Florence stood, smoothing down her borrowed dress. Probably. But if I refuse, I'll never know if I could have stood on my own merit instead of hiding behind your protection. This isn't about my protection. Yes, it is, Florence interrupted gently. Everyone thinks I'm only here because you took pity on me, including part of me. This trial. It's a chance to prove otherwise. To myself. If no one else. Jared studied her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then I'll stand as your advocate. It's my right, since the challenge involves my attention. What does that mean? It means I can advise you between trials, provide resources, and ensure the challenges are fair. His golden eyes blazed with something fierce. And it means Carmela Reynolds just made a very serious mistake. The main courtyard was packed with wolves when Florence arrived, Jared at her side and Evan trailing behind. A circular area had been cleared in the center, marked with white stones. Carmela stood on one side, looking radiant and confident, in a fighting outfit that somehow managed to be both practical and flattering. The crowd parted for Jared, wolves bowing their heads as he passed. He led Florence to the opposite side of the circle, his presence a solid anchor against the weight of hundreds of staring eyes. An elderly she-wolf stepped into the center, one of the council of elders who oversaw gathering law. The Trial of Worth has been invoked by Carmela Reynolds of the Southern Pack, challenging Florence Meza of the Eastern Pack for the attention and consideration of Alpha King Jared Moran. The formal words made it sound so cold, so transactional. Do both parties accept the terms and conditions of the trial? The elder asked. I accept, Carmela said immediately, her voice ringing with confidence. All eyes turned to Florence. This was her last chance to back out, to avoid the humiliation of almost certain defeat. She thought of 26 years of being overlooked, of whispered pity and casual cruelty, of standing at the edge of celebrations, watching everyone else find their happiness while she remained alone. I accept, Florence said clearly. The crowd erupted into excited murmurs. The elder raised her hand for silence. The first trial will be the trial of strength. Carmela Reynolds, as the challenger, you have the right to define the parameters. Carmela's smile was sharp as a blade. I challenge Florence Meza to a test of wolf form endurance. A race through the mountain trails. First to return with the white flower that grows only at the peak of Shadow Mountain wins. Florence's heart sank. Shadow Mountain was the tallest peak in the region, its trails treacherous and steep. Carmela was a strong runner, everyone knew it. And Florence, while capable, had never been exceptional at anything physical. But Jared leaned close, his voice low in her ear. Shadow Mountain has 3 routes to the peak. Carmela will take the main trail it's fastest if you're strong and fast. But there's a secondary path on the eastern slope. It's longer but less steep. Save your energy, pace yourself, and use your brain instead of trying to match her strength. Florence looked up at him, surprised. You're helping me cheat? I'm helping you be smart, he corrected. There are no rules about which path you take. Carmela chose a challenge that favors her strengths. I'm simply pointing out that you have strengths of your own. The elder was speaking, laying out the formal rules. Florence barely heard her. She was too busy studying Carmela's confident stance, the way the other she-wolf was already stretching like she'd won before they'd even begun. Maybe she had. Maybe this was hopeless. Or maybe, just maybe, Florence had spent so long being underestimated that no one expected her to actually fight back. Competitors, take your positions, the elder called. Florence moved to the starting line, her heart hammering. Carmela sneered at her from the adjacent position. I'm going to enjoy this, Carmela whispered. Watching you fail in front of everyone, proving once and for all that you're not worthy of anything, let alone the Alpha King's attention. Florence didn't respond. She was too busy shifting, bones cracking and reforming, fur spreading across her skin. Her wolf emerged small, unremarkable, but steady. Beside her, Carmela's golden wolf gleamed in the sunlight, larger and more impressive in every way. The elder raised her hand. On my mark. Begin. They exploded forward. Chapter 6. The Mountains Test. Carmela shot ahead like an arrow released from a bow, her golden wolf a blur of power and grace. The crowd's cheers followed her as she hit the main trail and began the steep ascent up Shadow Mountain. She didn't even look back, confident that Florence posed no real threat. Florence took the opposite direction. Her smaller brown wolf moved steadily toward the eastern slope, ignoring the confused murmurs from the watching crowd. Some wolves laughed, thinking she'd gotten lost or was too scared to take the direct route. But Florence kept moving, following the path Jared had described. The eastern trail wound through dense forest before beginning its gradual climb. It was longer, yes, but the incline was manageable. Florence settled into a rhythm, her wolf's muscles working efficiently as they climbed higher and higher into the mountain range. Trust yourself, her wolf seemed to say. We've always been steady, even when we weren't spectacular. The air grew thinner as she climbed. Through breaks in the trees, Florence caught occasional glimpses of the valley below, the tent city growing smaller with each mile. Somewhere on the other side of the mountain, Carmela was probably already halfway to the peak, her superior strength carrying her up the brutal main trail. But strength wasn't everything. Florence pushed on, her paws finding purchase on rocky outcroppings, her smaller size allowing her to navigate narrow passages that would have slowed a larger wolf. The trail twisted and turned, leading her through a section of caves that cut through the mountain's interior. Inside the caves, darkness pressed close. But Florence's wolf had excellent night vision, and she navigated the tunnels by scent and instinct. Water dripped from stalactites, creating an eerie symphony that echoed off stone walls. In the darkness, Florence almost missed the side passage, a narrow gap between rocks that led somewhere. She paused, ears swiveling. The main path continued upward through the caves, gradually ascending toward the peak. But this side passage. Florence squeezed through the gap, her smaller frame barely fitting. The passage opened into a small chamber where moonlight filtered through a crack in the mountain itself. And there, growing impossibly from bare rock, was a cluster of white flowers. Her heart leaped. These were the same flowers that grew at the peak. She recognized them from her grandmother's descriptions. Somehow, seeds must have fallen through the crack, taking root in this hidden chamber. Florence carefully plucked one flower between her teeth, its petals pure white and glowing faintly in the dim light. Then she turned and began the journey back down the mountain. Carmela reached the peak gasping, her legs trembling from the brutal climb. The main trail had been even more treacherous than she remembered, loose rocks that slid underfoot, sections so steep she'd had to scramble on her belly, narrow ledges with devastating drops on either side. But she'd made it, and surely that pathetic brown wolf was still struggling somewhere far below, probably giving up and slinking back to admit defeat. Carmela snatched a white flower from the cluster growing at the peak and began her descent, more carefully now. Injuries would undermine her victory. She needed to return triumphant and unscathed, proving her superiority in every way. The descent took longer than the climb. By the time Carmela emerged from the forest into the clearing where the crowd waited, the sun had moved significantly across the sky. She shifted back to human form, the white flower clutched victoriously in her hand. "I've returned," she announced, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "I claim victory in the trial of tea." She stopped. The crowd wasn't looking at her with the admiration she'd expected. Instead, they were staring at something behind her with expressions of shock and disbelief. Carmela turned slowly. Florence stood at the edge of the clearing, also in human form, also holding a white flower. Her borrowed dress was dusty from the journey, her hair disheveled, but her eyes were steady and calm. "That's impossible," Carmela sputtered. "You couldn't have. There's no way you beat me up that mountain." "I didn't beat you up the mountain," Florence said quietly. "I just found a smarter route." The elder stepped forward, examining both flowers carefully. Both are genuine white mountain flowers. However, according to the trial rules, the first to return wins. She turned to the crowd. "Who can testify to the order of arrival?" Several wolves spoke up at once, their testimony unanimous. Florence had returned a full 20 minutes before Carmela. The elder raised her hand. "The first trial goes to Florence Meza." The crowd erupted. Some wolves cheered, impressed by the underdog's unexpected victory. Others looked stunned. And Carmela stood frozen, her face cycling through shock, rage, and disbelief. Florence's knees felt weak with relief. She'd won. Somehow, impossibly, she'd won. Jared appeared at her side, his expression carefully neutral for the watching crowd, but his eyes blazed with pride and something else Florence couldn't name. "Well done," he murmured. "Rest now. The next trial will be harder." The trial of wisdom took place that evening in the palace's great hall. Long tables had been arranged in the center, each with parchment, ink, and complex diagrams drawn on large boards. The trial of wisdom will test mental acuity, problem-solving, and strategic thinking, the elder announced. Each competitor will be given 3 challenges. You have 1 hour to solve as many as possible. The one with the most correct solutions wins. Carmela shot Florence a venomous look as they took their positions at separate tables. The golden she-wolf was still seething from her loss, but there was confidence in her eyes now. Carmela had been educated by private tutors, had access to her father's extensive library, had every advantage that came with status and wealth. Florence had her grandmother's old books, and whatever she'd learned through her own determination. The challenges were revealed. First, a complex riddle written in 3 ancient languages, each translation offering clues to unlock the others. Second, a strategic problem involving resource allocation during a harsh winter, how to keep a pack of 300 wolves fed when supplies could only sustain 200. Third, a mathematical puzzle involving lunar cycles, tides, and their effect on wolf fertility and pack dynamics over a century. Florence stared at the challenges, her mind whirring. They were designed to be nearly impossible, requiring knowledge most wolves wouldn't possess. But her grandmother had been a scholar in her youth, and she'd passed down knowledge that most modern wolves dismissed as irrelevant. The ancient languages, Florence had learned them from her grandmother's journals. The resource allocation. Her grandmother had survived 3 such winters and documented her strategies. The mathematical puzzle. Her grandmother had been fascinated by lunar patterns and their effects. Florence picked up the quill and began to write. An hour later, both wolves set down their quills, as the elder called time. A panel of 3 scholars, wolves known for their intelligence and education, examined the solutions. The crowd waited in tense silence. Finally, the head scholar stepped forward. Carmela Reynolds solved the strategic problem correctly and made partial progress on the riddle. Her mathematical solution was incomplete. Carmela's confident smile faltered. Florence Meza solved all 3 challenges completely and correctly. Moreover, she provided additional context and historical references that demonstrate exceptional depth of knowledge. The hall exploded with noise. Florence sat very still, hardly believing what she'd just heard. She'd won. Again. The second trial goes to Florence Meza, the elder declared. The score is 2-0. Carmela stood abruptly, her chair scraping against stone. This is ridiculous. She's nobody. She can't possibly. She can, and she did. Jared's voice cut through the hall like a blade. He'd remained silent through both trials, as tradition dictated, but now he rose from his seat on the raised platform. Florence Meza has won fairly according to ancient law. If you wish to challenge the legitimacy of the trials, you challenge the traditions you yourself invoked. Carmela's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. To challenge the trial's legitimacy now would be to insult not just Florence, but the entire gathered assembly and the laws they all lived by. The final trial will take place tomorrow at sunset, the elder announced. The trial of heart. As the challenger, Carmela Reynolds, you may set its parameters tonight. Consider carefully, it is your last chance. Florence found herself back in her tent after the trial, surrounded by congratulatory pack members. Sam was practically bouncing with excitement, and even Alpha Scott looked impressed, if bemused. But Florence felt numb. She'd won 2 trials against impossible odds, and now everything hinged on the third. The trial of heart, the most subjective, the most unpredictable, the most dangerous of all. You should rest. Olive's voice cut through the chatter. Florence's friend had arrived that afternoon with Daniel, having made the journey to support her. Tomorrow will be hard. The tent gradually emptied until only Florence, Olive, and Sam remained. How did you do it? Sam asked, awed. I barely understood those challenges, let alone knew how to solve them. My grandmother, Florence said softly, touching the silver pendant at her throat. She taught me everything. I just never thought it would matter. It matters, Olive said firmly. You matter, Flor. You've proven that today. But Florence couldn't shake the worry gnawing at her. The trial of heart is different. It's not about knowledge or strategy. It's about essence. Who you are at your core, and Carmela will design it to highlight everything I lack. Or, Sam suggested, she'll design it to highlight everything she thinks you lack. And she'll be wrong. A guard appeared at the tent entrance. Florence Meza. The Alpha King requests your presence in the palace gardens. Jared was pacing when Florence arrived, his usual composure cracked by visible agitation. He stopped when he saw her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. You were brilliant today, he said without preamble. But Florence, I need you to understand something about tomorrow's trial. She waited, sensing this was important. The trial of heart can take many forms, but traditionally, it asks you to make an impossible choice. A decision that reveals your true character, your deepest values. He moved closer, his golden eyes intense. Carmela will craft something designed to break you, to make you choose between things you can't bear to lose. I've already lost almost everything, Florence said quietly. What more can she take? Your integrity, Jared answered. Your sense of self, the things that make you who you are. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. I've watched you these past days. You have a strength most wolves never develop, the strength of someone who's survived isolation without becoming bitter. That's rare. That's valuable. Florence looked down at their joined hands. You barely know me. I know enough, Jared said. I know you chose honesty over flattery, intelligence over brute force. I know you've spent your life being overlooked, and somehow remained kind instead of cruel. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I know that if you win tomorrow, it will be because you deserve to, not because of my interference. And if I lose, then my offer still stands, he said firmly. But Florence, I don't think you're going to lose. Florence wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the capability she demonstrated today. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, Carmela would strike at the softest parts of her, the wounds that had never fully healed. Tomorrow Florence would discover what she was truly made of. And somewhere in her chest, beneath the fear and the doubt, A small flame of determination refused to die. She'd come this far, she would see it through to the end, whatever that end might be. I should go, Florence said, gently withdrawing her hand. Rest, like everyone keeps telling me. Florence. Jared caught her hand again, just for a moment. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already proven yourself. To me, to the gathering, and I hope to yourself. Don't forget that. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned to leave. Behind her, the Alpha King stood in the moonlit garden and wondered when exactly a diplomatic gesture had become something more. Chapter 7, The Trial of Heart. The execution grounds, as they were grimly called, sat at the northern edge of the valley. A natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside where wolves gathered for judgments, executions, and apparently, trials of heart. Florence arrived at sunset as commanded, flanked by Sam and Olive. Their presence a small comfort against the sea of watching faces. The entire gathering had turned out for this final trial. Thousands of wolves packed the stone tiers, their voices creating a low hum of anticipation. Florence's stomach churned as she descended the steps toward the central platform where the elder waited. Carmela was already there, looking immaculate in a white dress that seemed chosen specifically to evoke purity and righteousness. Her expression was serene, almost peaceful, which terrified Florence more than anger would have. A wolf who looked that calm had something devastating planned. Jared sat in the royal box with his beta and guards, his face an impassive mask. But when Florence's eyes found his across the amphitheater, she saw something in those golden depths. Concern, perhaps, or a warning she couldn't quite read. We gather for the final trial. The elder's voice rang out across the space. The trial of heart, oldest and most sacred of our tests. Carmela Reynolds. As challenger, you have designed this trial. Present it now. Carmela stepped forward, and her smile was soft, sympathetic even. It made Florence's skin crawl. The trial of heart should test what we value most. Carmela began, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the amphitheater. It should reveal the truth of our character, strip away pretense, and show who we really are when forced to choose. She gestured, and guards brought forward 2 cages. Florence's blood turned to ice. In the first cage was Sam, her friend, bound and gagged, eyes wide with terror. In the second cage was a young wolf Florence didn't recognize, barely more than a pup, maybe 13 or 14 years old, trembling and crying silently. What is this? Florence's voice came out strangled. A choice, Carmela said simply. The trial of heart demands sacrifice, Florence. It demands that we prove what and who we value most. The elder stepped forward, her ancient face grave. Explain the trial's parameters. Carmela's smile widened. Simple. Florence must choose which one lives. Her friend Samantha, who has stood by her side and supported her through this entire ordeal, or this young wolf Robbie Ellison, whose only crime was being an orphan that no pack wanted. A nobody, like Florence herself once was. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Florence felt her knees weaken. The one not chosen will be exiled from all territories. Carmela continued. Stripped of pack protection, forbidden to seek shelter with any wolf pack in the northern territories. They will be alone, vulnerable to rogues, to the elements, to everything that hunts wolves who travel without the safety of numbers. This is barbaric, someone shouted from the crowd. Others murmured agreement, but the elder raised her hand. The trial of heart has always involved sacrifice, she said, though her voice was heavy. While this interpretation is extreme, it falls within the bounds of ancient law. Florence Meza. Do you accept these terms or do you forfeit the trial? Florence couldn't speak. Her eyes moved between Sam, her friend, her ally, one of the few wolves who'd never abandoned her, and the terrified young wolf who'd done nothing wrong except exist without protection. If she forfeited, Carmela won by default. And everything Florence had proven, everything she'd fought for, would be dismissed as the desperate struggle of a wolf not strong enough to make the hard choices. But if she accepted, how much time do I have? Florence heard herself ask. Until the moon rises fully above the eastern peak, the elder answered. Approximately 1 hour. Florence looked up at Jared, silently pleading for guidance, for help, for anything. But he sat frozen in the royal box, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly she could see the white of his knuckles even from this distance. As an advocate, he could advise between trials, but during them, he was as powerless as she was. I accept, Florence whispered. The crowd erupted. Sam thrashed in her cage, making muffled sounds behind the gag. The young wolf Robbie just cried harder, his thin shoulders shaking. Excellent, Carmela purred. You have 1 hour, Florence. Choose wisely. Choose who deserves to stay, and who deserves to be cast out into the darkness alone. Florence approached the cages on trembling legs. Sam's eyes were furious behind her gag. But not at Florence, at Carmela. At this whole twisted trial. The young wolf, Robbie, looked at her with desperate hope, like she might somehow save him from the nightmare his life had become. Can I speak to them? Florence asked. The elder nodded. You may speak. They may not respond. Florence knelt before Sam's cage first. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted. Sam made emphatic sounds behind her gag, shaking her head violently. Even bound and facing exile. She was trying to tell Florence something. Her eyes kept darting toward Robbie, then back to Florence, over and over. Choose him, Sam seemed to be saying. Save the kid. Florence moved to Robbie's cage next. Up close, she could see how thin he was, how his clothes were patched and worn. An orphan no pack wanted. She knew that story had almost lived it herself before her grandmother took her in. How old are you? She asked gently. 13, Robbie managed between sobs. Please, I don't want to be alone. I've always been alone, please. 13. Just a child. Cast out into the world alone. He wouldn't survive a month. Florence stood, her mind racing. This was Carmela's masterstroke, a choice designed to be impossible. Choose her friend, and Florence would be condemning an innocent child to almost certain death. Choose the child. And she'd be betraying the one wolf who'd stood by her side through everything. There was no right answer. Just varying degrees of wrong. Florence turned to face Carmela, who watched with barely concealed glee. This trial isn't about heart, Florence said, her voice carrying across the amphitheater. It's about cruelty. You've created a scenario where I lose no matter what I choose. That's life, Carmela countered sweetly. Sometimes there are no good choices, only hard ones. And a wolf worthy of the Alpha King's attention should be able to make those choices without hesitation. Is that what you'd do? Florence challenged. Hesitate not at all before condemning someone to exile? If necessary? Yes. Carmela's expression turned cold. That's what leadership requires, the ability to make impossible decisions for the greater good. The greater good, Florence repeated. She looked around the amphitheater, at the thousands of watching wolves. Some looked uncomfortable with this trial, but most just seemed curious about what she would do. Entertainment. Her impossible choice was entertainment to them. Just like her loneliness had been pitied, her struggles observed from a safe distance by wolves who'd never had to face what she faced. Florence's hands clenched into fists. An idea was forming, dangerous, possibly stupid, but the only path she could see through this nightmare. I need time to think, she announced. Of course, the elder said. You have 45 minutes remaining. Florence walked away from the cages, away from Carmela's triumphant expression, away from the elder's grave face. She moved to the edge of the platform and stood there, staring out at the darkening valley where the tent city glowed with evening fires. Her mind worked frantically. The trial's rules: she must choose one wolf to stay, condemning the other to exile. But there was something in the wording, something she'd caught. The one not chosen will be exiled from all territories. Not the one you don't save. Not the one you abandon. The one not chosen. What if she chose neither? No, that wouldn't work. The trial required a choice. Required her to name one wolf who would be protected. But what if? Florence turned suddenly. I need to speak to the Alpha King. The elder frowned. That is not typically. As my advocate, he has the right to be consulted, Florence interrupted. I'm invoking that right. After a moment's hesitation, the elder nodded. Jared rose from the royal box and descended to the platform, his face carefully neutral. When he reached Florence, she stepped close enough that only he could hear her whispered words. Can an Alpha King grant pack membership? Jared's eyes widened slightly. Yes. Any Alpha King has the authority to adopt wolves into his personal pack. And once a wolf belongs to a pack, they can't be exiled from territories without that pack alpha's consent. That's correct, but Florence, if I choose Sam, can you immediately adopt Robbie into your pack before the exile takes effect? Understanding dawned in Jared's golden eyes. That's technically possible, but extremely irregular, and it would require me to intervene directly in a trial that's supposed to test your heart, not my authority. Would it violate the trial rules? No, Jared admitted. But Carmela will claim you're using my power as a shield, that you can't make hard choices on your own. Let her, Florence said fiercely. Because the hard choice here isn't deciding who deserves safety more. The hard choice is admitting that the trial itself is wrong and finding a way to save both of them. Jared stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. You continue to surprise me, Florence Meza. Is that a yes? It is. He raised his voice so the entire amphitheater could hear. I will honor your request. Florence turned back to face the crowd, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Carmela watched with narrowed eyes, sensing something had shifted but not yet understanding what. I've made my choice, Florence announced. The crowd fell silent. Sam stopped thrashing. Even Robbie's sobs quieted. I choose Samantha Jarvis to remain under pack protection, Florence said clearly. Carmela's smile was victorious. The guards moved toward Robbie's cage to begin the exile process. However, Florence continued, her voice ringing out, before that exile can take effect, I invoke my right to request that Alpha King Jared Moran adopt Robbie Ellison into his personal pack. The amphitheater erupted into chaos. Carmela's face went white with rage. The guards froze, uncertain. Jared stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. I, Jared Moran, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, do formally adopt Robbie Ellison into my personal pack, effective immediately. He is under my protection, and cannot be exiled without my express consent, which I do not give. The elder stepped forward, her ancient face showing something that might have been approval. The trial asked Florence Meza to choose one wolf to remain under pack protection. She has done so. The second wolf has since been adopted into a pack before exile proceedings could be completed. This is unorthodox but legal. This is cheating, Carmela shrieked. She used his power to avoid making the choice. I made the choice, Florence said calmly. I chose Sam. But I also chose to find a way to save both of them. Because that's what heart actually means, not accepting impossible choices as inevitable, but fighting to protect everyone when you can. The crowd's murmur shifted. Some wolves were nodding, impressed. Others looked thoughtful. The elder raised her hands. The trial has been completed according to its parameters. Florence Meza chose one wolf. As required, the fate of the second wolf was subsequently altered by pack adoption, a separate matter outside the trial's jurisdiction. She turned to the crowd. The trial of heart goes to Florence Meza. She has won all 3 trials and proven her worth. The amphitheater exploded, with noise, cheers, arguments, shocked exclamations. Carmela stood frozen, her beautiful face twisted with disbelief and fury. Jared moved to the cages, personally releasing both Sam and Robbie. Sam ripped off her gag and immediately threw her arms around Florence. You brilliant, crazy wolf, Sam gasped. I thought I was so scared. I know, Florence whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Robbie approached tentatively, his thin face streaked with tears. You saved me? Florence knelt to his level. We saved each other. Are you okay with being part of the Alpha King's pack? I should have asked first. The boy launched himself at her, sobbing into her shoulder. Thank you. I'll be good, I promise. I'll work hard. You'll be safe, Florence said firmly, hugging him back. That's all that matters. Over Robbie's shoulder, she saw Carmela storming from the amphitheater, her white dress billowing behind her like a flag of surrender. A few wolves followed her sycophants and those who'd been counting on her victory, but most remained, their eyes on Florence with expressions ranging from newfound respect to outright admiration. Jared approached as Robbie finally released Florence. The young wolf looked up at the Alpha King with wide, terrified eyes. Don't be afraid, Jared said gently, crouching down. Florence asked me to protect you, and I don't take that responsibility lightly. You're pack now, Robbie. That means you're safe. The boy nodded, still crying, but with relief now instead of terror. The elder approached Florence, her ancient eyes sharp and assessing. That was cleverly done, ruthlessly clever in fact. You bent the rules without breaking them. I learned from the best, Florence said, glancing at Jared. Sometimes the answer isn't to choose between bad options, it's to find the option no one else saw. Indeed. The elder raised her voice one final time. Florence Meza has triumphed in the trial of worth. The challenge is complete. Carmela Reynolds' claim is dismissed. As the crowd began to disperse, Florence felt the weight of the past few days finally crash down on her. Her legs went weak, and Jared caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy, he murmured. You've been through enough. Is it really over? Florence asked, hardly daring to believe it. It's over, Jared confirmed. You won. Fairly, brilliantly, and completely. Florence looked around at Sam's relieved face, at Robbie's grateful tears, at the wolves departing with new stories to tell about the underdog who'd refused to accept impossible choices. She'd won. Against all odds, she'd actually won. But as the adrenaline faded and exhaustion set in, Florence realized something. The trials might be over. But her real test was just beginning. Because in 2 days, the mate ceremony would take place. And she still had to face the question that had brought her to this gathering in the first place. Was there a mate waiting for her somewhere in the world? Or was she truly meant to be alone? Chapter 8. The ceremony approaches. The day after the trials, Florence woke to find herself something she'd never been before, famous. Wolves she'd never met stopped her in the tent city to congratulate her. Young she-wolves asked how she'd solved the wisdom challenges. Males nodded respectfully as she passed. Even high-ranking wolves from powerful packs acknowledged her presence with more than dismissive glances. It was overwhelming and surreal and utterly exhausting. You're a legend now, Olive said, practically vibrating with excitement as they walked through the market stalls that had sprung up around the gathering. Did you hear what they're calling you? The wolf who wouldn't choose. It's already spreading to other territories. Florence winced. I don't want to be a legend. I just want to. To what? Olive interrupted gently. To go back to being invisible? Flor, that's never going to happen again. You've changed everything. Had she? Florence wasn't sure. The trials felt like a fever dream now, something that had happened to someone else. Not the plain brown wolf who'd spent 26 years being overlooked. They passed a stall selling woven charms, and the vendor, a elderly she-wolf with knowing eyes, called out to Florence. You, girl. Come here. Florence approached hesitantly. The vendor studied her face for a long moment, then reached beneath her table and pulled out a delicate bracelet made of silver thread and small crystals. For the ceremony tomorrow night, the vendor said, pressing it into Florence's hands. No charge. Consider it payment for the entertainment you've provided. I can't accept. You can and you will, the vendor insisted. That bracelet has been in my family for 6 generations. It's supposed to help reveal truth, show you what's real and what's illusion when the moon is full. She smiled, her weathered face crinkling. I think you need it more than I do. Florence clutched the bracelet, emotion tightening her throat. Thank you. As they walked away, Olive linked her arm through Florence's. See? The world sees you now. Really sees you. But being seen came with its own complications. Later that afternoon, as Florence returned to her tent, she found an unexpected visitor waiting. Jesse Connor, Carmela's mate. He looked terrible, gaunt, hollow-eyed, like a wolf who hadn't slept in days. When he saw Florence, something crumpled in his expression. I need to talk to you, he said quietly. Florence glanced around, but they were relatively alone. About what? About Carmela. About what she's planning. Jesse's hands clenched into fists. I know I shouldn't be telling you this. She's my mate. And loyalty should, but I can't. I can't watch her destroy herself like this. Florence's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Jesse moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She's not done, Florence. The trials might be over. But Carmela. She's obsessed. She's convinced that if you don't find your mate at the ceremony tomorrow, and you accept the Alpha King's offer, she'll find a way to challenge it, to claim you manipulated him, use some kind of magic or trickery. That's insane, Florence breathed. I know. But she won't let it go. Jesse's eyes were desperate. Our mate bond. It was never strong to begin with. She always wanted more. Someone more important. More powerful. And now that she's lost publicly, humiliated in front of everyone. She's dangerous, Florence. Please, just be careful. Before Florence could respond, Jesse turned and walked away quickly, his shoulders hunched like a wolf carrying an impossible burden. Florence stood frozen, her mind reeling. Tomorrow night was the mate ceremony, the moment she'd been both dreading and desperately hoping for. And now she had to worry about Carmela's machinations on top of everything else. There you are. Florence spun to find Jared approaching, Robbie trailing behind him like a shadow. The young wolf had barely left the Alpha King's side since being adopted, still half convinced that safety might vanish if he let Jared out of his sight. "We've been looking for you," Jared said. His eyes swept her face, reading tension there. "What's wrong?" Florence glanced at Robbie, unwilling to discuss Carmela's potential schemes in front of the traumatized young wolf. "Nothing. Just pre-ceremony nerves, I guess." Jared studied her for a moment, clearly unconvinced, but let it drop. "Robbie wanted to give you something. To say thank you properly." The boy stepped forward shyly, holding out a small carved figure. It was crude but clearly made with care, a wolf, mid-leap, captured in wood. "I made it," Robbie said quietly. "Before everything, before the trial. I like carving, and I wanted you to have something, because you saved me when no one else would." Florence's eyes burned with unshed tears as she accepted the carving. "It's beautiful, Robbie, thank you." The boy's face lit up with a smile that transformed his features from haunted to almost peaceful. "Alpha King Jared says I can stay in the palace after the gathering, that I'll have my own room and tutors and everything." His voice dropped to an odd whisper. "I've never had my own room before." "You deserve it," Florence said firmly. She looked up at Jared. "Thank you for honoring your promise." "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep," Jared replied. His golden eyes held hers. "About any matter." The weight of those words settled between them, a reminder of his original offer. Still standing, still waiting for her decision. "Robbie," Jared said, not breaking eye contact with Florence. "Go find Beta Evan. Tell him I need him to show you the training yards." The boy nodded eagerly and scampered off, leaving Florence and Jared alone in the space between tents. "Tomorrow night," Jared said quietly, "you'll stand in that ceremony with hundreds of other unmated wolves. And maybe probably you'll feel that bond click into place with someone. Some wolf who's been waiting for you as long as you've been waiting for them." "And if I don't?" Florence asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you'll have a choice to make." Jared stepped closer, and Florence's breath caught at his proximity. "I meant what I said, Florence. My offer stands. Not because I pity you. Not because you won the trials, though that was impressive as hell. But because in a world of wolves who lie and manipulate and scheme, you've been nothing but honest." "Honesty isn't much of a foundation for a partnership," Florence pointed out. "It's more than most people have," Jared countered. "And I'm not talking about love, Florence. I'm not promising you some fairy tale romance. I'm offering you a partnership, someone to stand beside, someone who understands what it's like to be alone even when surrounded by crowds. Maybe that's not what you dreamed of. But it's more than I ever thought I'd have," Florence interrupted softly. "But Jared, what if I find my mate tomorrow? What if the moon goddess really did pair me with someone, and I just haven't met them yet?" Something flickered in Jared's eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or relief. "Then you take your mate and be happy. That's how this is supposed to work. And you? I'll find another solution to my loneliness problem," he said, with a wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm the Alpha King. I'm resourceful." Florence wanted to say something more, but the words tangled in her throat. What could she say? That the thought of finding her mate filled her with as much anxiety as hope? That she'd been alone so long she wasn't sure she knew how to be partnered with anyone? That Jared's offer felt safer somehow than the vulnerability of a true mate bond? "I should go," Florence finally said. "The ceremony is tomorrow at moonrise, and I need to prepare. Somehow." Jared nodded, stepping back to give her space. "Florence, whatever happens tomorrow night, you've already proven you're extraordinary. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." The mate ceremony would take place in the valley's center, in a natural clearing ringed by ancient standing stones. Florence arrived as the sun set, joining the crowd of unmated wolves gathering at the clearing's edge. There were so many of them, hundreds, maybe more than 1,000. Wolves of all ages, all ranks, all backgrounds, each one hoping that tonight would be the night they found their other half. Sam stood nearby, her face a mixture of hope and terror. Since her previous mate bond had broken, she was technically eligible again, though everyone knew second bonds were even rarer than first ones. "Are you nervous?" Sam asked. "Terrified," Florence admitted. Around them, wolves were doing last-minute preparations. Some wore ceremonial clothing passed down through families. Others, like Florence in her borrowed green dress and the vendor's bracelet around her wrist, made do with whatever they could find. Carmela was there too, Florence noticed, positioned on the opposite side of the clearing. She wore gold tonight, a dress that caught the fading light and made her look like she'd been dipped in sunlight. Her eyes swept the crowd until they landed on Florence. And the hatred there was palpable. Jesse wasn't with her. Florence wondered if he'd been forbidden from attending, or if he simply couldn't bear to watch his mate hope for someone else. The elder who'd overseen the trials stepped into the center of the clearing, her voice magically amplified to carry across the valley. Unmated wolves of all territories, we gather under the moon goddess's watchful eye to honor the ancient tradition of the mate ceremony. Tonight, as the full moon rises, those who are destined to be paired will feel the bond click into place, an unmistakable pull toward your other half. Florence's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. The moment she'd been waiting for, hoping for, fearing for 26 years. When the moon's light touches the center stone, the elder continued, the ceremony will begin. You will walk the circle, and if your mate is present, you will know. The bond cannot be mistaken for anything else. It is recognition on a soul-deep level, the feeling of finding a piece of yourself you didn't know was missing. The sun slipped below the horizon. Stars emerged in the darkening sky, and on the eastern horizon, the full moon began its ascent, huge and silver and impossibly bright. Florence's hands trembled. Around her, hundreds of wolves stood in tense anticipation, all waiting for the same thing. The moon climbed higher. Its light spilled across the valley like liquid silver, touching the mountains, the tents, the palace in the distance. And then it touched the center stone. The ceremony had begun. Walk, the elder commanded. Circle the stones. Open your hearts to the bond. If your mate is here, you will find them. The crowd began to move, forming a slow-moving river of hopeful wolves circling the ancient stones. Florence let herself be carried along, her eyes scanning faces, her wolf reaching out with every sense, searching for that spark of recognition. Nothing. She passed males and females, young wolves and old, wolves of every rank and territory. Some wolves had already paired off, moving to the center of the circle with expressions of wonder and joy as their bonds clicked into place. The air filled with excited cries, with tears of relief and happiness. But Florence felt nothing. She kept walking, circling again and again as the crowd thinned. Paired wolves moved to the edges of the ceremony, claiming their mates with kisses and embraces. Unpaired wolves kept circling, their hopes slowly transforming to desperation. Florence's chest grew tighter with each revolution. She'd passed every wolf here at least 3 times now. If her mate were present, she'd have felt it by now. The bond was supposed to be unmistakable. Please, she begged the moon goddess silently. Please let me feel it. Please don't let me be alone. But the moon climbed higher, indifferent to her prayers. An hour passed. Then 2. The circle of unpaired wolves had shrunk to perhaps 100. Then 50. Then 30. Each time someone found their mate, Florence felt her hope crack a little more. Sam had found someone, a gentle-eyed male from the Western Territories. She'd looked at Florence with guilt and joy warring in her expression, before being pulled away by her new mate's eager family. Carmela remained unpaired as well, her beautiful face growing increasingly desperate as she circled and found no one. 3 hours after the ceremony began, the elder stepped forward again. The moon has reached its peak. Those who have not found their mates tonight may try again at the next gathering 5 years hence. Do not despair, the moon goddess's timing is her own, and she may yet have plans beyond our understanding. Florence stood frozen as the unpaired wolves began to disperse, their shoulders slumped with disappointment. She'd circled for 3 hours, passed thousands of wolves, and felt nothing. No bond, no recognition, no mate. The moon goddess had not forgotten her, Florence realized. The moon goddess had simply decided she wasn't worthy of the gift everyone else received. She became aware of someone standing beside her and turned to find Jared there, his golden eyes reflecting moonlight. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Florence's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. "Not here, not in front of everyone. So am I. My offer still stands." She looked at him, really looked at him. The Alpha King who'd extended his hand when no one else had, who'd seen value in her honesty, who'd helped her save Robbie, who understood loneliness in a way few others could. He wasn't her mate. The moon goddess hadn't chosen him for her. But maybe, Florence thought, she could choose him for herself. "Ask me again," she whispered. "Properly this time." Jared's eyes widened slightly. Then he did something that made the remaining wolves gasp. He knelt before her, the Alpha King on one knee in front of a mateless nobody. "Florence Meza," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet clearing. "I'm not your mate. The moon goddess didn't bind us together. But I'm asking anyway, choose me. Not because you have no other options, but because we understand each other. Because loneliness shared is loneliness halved. Because I think we could build something real, even without fate's interference. His hand extended toward her, palm up, just like that first night in the pack meeting hall. Choose me tonight, Florence. And let's find out what happens when two people decide their own destiny instead of waiting for fate to choose for them. The clearing had gone absolutely silent. Every eye was on them, the Alpha King kneeling before the wolf everyone had once pitied, offering not a mate bond but something perhaps more radical, a choice. Florence looked at his hand, at his face, at the genuine hope and respect in his golden eyes. She thought of 26 years of waiting, of loneliness that had carved itself into her bones, of the mate bond she'd never feel, the destined partner who didn't exist. And she thought of Jared, who'd seen her when everyone else looked past her, who'd stood as her advocate, who'd helped her save Robbie, who'd offered partnership instead of pity. It wasn't what she dreamed of as a young wolf listening to her grandmother's stories. But dreams, Florence had learned, sometimes needed to evolve to match reality. She placed her hand in his. I choose you, Jared Morin. The clearing erupted into chaos, shocked exclamations, excited chatter, and from somewhere in the crowd, Carmela's scream of pure rage. But Florence barely heard it. She was too busy watching Jared's face break into a genuine smile as he stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her closer. Thank you, he murmured against her hair, for taking the leap with me. Thank you, Florence whispered back, for offering the leap in the first place. And as the moon shone down on two wolves who'd chosen each other despite fate's silence, Florence felt something shift in her chest. Not a mate bond, but something else, something just as real, just as powerful. The feeling of finally not being alone. Chapter 9. When Tradition Fights Back. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Florence had ever experienced. Wolves who'd witnessed her choice crowded around, some congratulating her, others debating whether what she'd done was romantic or radical or possibly blasphemous. The Alpha King choosing a mate without a bond, it was unprecedented in recent history. But not everyone was celebrating. Florence caught glimpses of Carmela throughout the evening, the golden she-wolf's face twisted with fury as she watched Florence stand beside Jared during the formal announcements. Several times, Florence felt the weight of hostile stares from wolves loyal to Carmela, or simply scandalized by the night's events. Ignore them, Jared murmured in her ear, as they stood on the palace steps, acknowledging the crowd. They'll adjust. Change always makes people uncomfortable at first. But discomfort, Florence would soon learn, could curdle into something far more dangerous. It was nearly midnight when Florence finally escaped to her tent, exhausted from hours of scrutiny and forced smiles. She'd barely removed her borrowed dress when the tent flap rustled and Olive slipped inside, Daniel close behind. Are you insane? Olive hissed, though her eyes sparkled with something between admiration and terror. Florence, do you understand what you just did? I accepted a partnership offer, Florence said evenly, pulling on her sleeping clothes. The same offer he made publicly at the pack meeting. You chose the Alpha King without a mate bond, Daniel corrected, his voice gentle but concerned. That's going to have consequences, Flor. Political ones. Social ones. Florence sank onto her bedroll, suddenly too tired to stand. I know. But what was I supposed to do? Wait another 5 years for a mate who doesn't exist? Spend my whole life hoping for something the moon goddess clearly never intended for me? Olive knelt beside her, taking her hands. I'm not criticizing your choice. I'm worried. There are going to be wolves who see this as wrong, as going against natural law. And Carmela. She cut herself off, exchanging a glance with Daniel. What about Carmela? Florence demanded. She's spreading rumors, Daniel said reluctantly, claiming you used dark magic to influence the Alpha King, that you somehow blocked your true mate bond, to trap him into the partnership. Florence's stomach dropped. That's ridiculous. You can't block a mate bond. It either exists, or it doesn't. We know that, Olive said, but not everyone does. And the wolves who wanted Carmela to win, or who bet money on her, or who just enjoy drama, they're willing to believe anything that makes you the villain. A cold dread settled over Florence. She'd been so focused on surviving the trials, on making it through the ceremony, that she hadn't considered what would come after. The scrutiny. The accusations. The wolves who would resent her for achieving what they couldn't. There's more, Daniel said quietly. Jesse came to me earlier. He said Carmela is planning something for tomorrow. He doesn't know what, but he's terrified. Said she's been meeting with some of the more traditional pack elders, the ones who believe mate bonds are sacred and shouldn't be bypassed. Florence closed her eyes. Of course she is. You need to tell Jared, Olive insisted. He needs to know what she's planning. I can't run to him for protection every time someone threatens me. Florence protested. That's exactly what they'll use to prove I'm not strong enough for this partnership. Flor. No. Florence stood, her exhaustion transforming into stubborn determination. I won those trials without hiding behind Jared's authority. Well, mostly without it. I can handle whatever Carmela throws at me now. Olive and Daniel exchanged worried glances, but didn't argue further. They said their goodbyes, and Florence was finally alone with her thoughts. She lay in the darkness, the vendor's bracelet still on her wrist, the one supposed to reveal truth from illusion under the full moon. Had it worked? Was Jared's offer truth or illusion? Was her choice brave or desperately foolish? Sleep didn't come for a long time. The next morning brought an unwelcome summons. Not from Jared, but from the Council of Elders, the ancient wolves who advised on matters of tradition and law. Florence stood before them in a circular stone chamber deep within the palace, acutely aware of how small and insignificant she felt under their collective gaze. 7 elders sat in high-backed chairs, their faces carved from years and wisdom and, in some cases, unmistakable disapproval. Florence Meza, the head elder, the same one who'd overseen her trials, spoke. We've called you here to discuss your arrangement with Alpha King Jared Morin. It's not an arrangement, Florence said carefully. It's a partnership. A partnership without a mate bond, another elder said, her voice sharp with censure. Do you understand how unprecedented this is, how it violates centuries of tradition? With respect, elder, it doesn't violate anything, Florence countered. There's no law requiring mate bonds for partnerships. It's simply been the custom. Custom exists for a reason, a male elder interjected. The mate bond ensures compatibility, loyalty, and the strength to lead together. Without it, how can we trust that your partnership will endure? How can we trust that you won't simply abandon the Alpha King when someone more advantageous comes along? Florence felt anger kindle in her chest. You mean the way wolves with mate bonds never abandon each other? Because I watched my best friend's mate bond break last month. Bonds aren't guarantees, elder. They're just starting points. She speaks heresy, another elder hissed, questioning the moon goddess's gifts. I'm not questioning anything, Florence interrupted, knowing she was being dangerously bold but unable to stop herself. I'm simply stating facts. Mate bonds can break. Mates can be cruel. And wolves without bonds can still build something real and lasting if they choose to. This is exactly the problem, the head elder said, though her tone was less harsh than the others. You speak of choice as if it supersedes destiny, as if mortal wolves have the right to determine their own paths without the moon goddess's guidance. Don't we? Florence asked quietly. If the moon goddess gave us free will, doesn't that include the freedom to choose our own partners? The chamber fell silent. The elders exchanged glances, some troubled, others outraged. Finally, the head elder spoke. We cannot forbid this partnership. The Alpha King's authority supersedes even ours in such matters. But we can and do express our grave concerns. And we warn you, Florence Meza. If this partnership fails, if you prove unworthy of the position you've claimed, the consequences will fall on you alone. The Alpha King's reputation can survive scandal. Yours cannot. It was both a warning and a threat. Florence understood the message clearly. Succeed, or be destroyed. I understand, she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. You may go, the head elder said. But Florence? The wolves are watching. All of them. Don't give them reason to doubt you. Florence emerged from the council chamber shaking. She'd barely made it 3 steps down the corridor when a hand caught her elbow, spinning her around. Carmela, enjoy your victory? The golden she-wolf snarled, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. Enjoy stealing what should have been mine. I didn't steal anything, Florence said, trying to pull her arm free. Jared made his choice. He made the wrong choice. Carmela's grip tightened painfully. You're nobody, Florence. You come from nothing, you offer nothing, you are nothing. The only reason he noticed you at all is because I forced him to by issuing that challenge. Florence went still. What? Carmela's laugh was bitter. You really thought he saw you on his own? That he randomly decided to single out a pathetic, mateless nobody? I suggested the trial of worth to Alpha Scott specifically because I knew the Alpha King would have to pay attention. I thought he'd see how superior I was, how perfect we'd be together. Instead, he fixated on you because you were broken and he pitied you. The words landed like physical blows. Florence felt her world tilt slightly. Had Jared only noticed her because Carmela drew attention to her? Was his entire interest born from manufactured circumstance? The bracelet reveals truth from illusion, the vendor had said. You're lying, Florence said, but her voice wavered. Am I? Carmela leaned closer, her breath hot against Florence's ear. Ask him. Ask Jared if he would have noticed you at all if I hadn't issued that challenge. Ask him if he really chose you, or just chose the opposite of what I represented. She released Florence's arm and stepped back, smoothing her golden hair with practiced grace. You've won nothing, Florence. You're living in a fantasy that's going to shatter the moment he realizes you're not interesting enough to sustain his attention. And when it does? I'll be waiting. Carmela swept away, leaving Florence standing in the empty corridor with doubt eating away at her chest like acid. She found Jared in the palace gardens, reviewing documents with Beta Evan. He looked up when she approached, his expression brightening in a way that made her heart ache. Florence, I was just about to send for you. There are some matters we need to discuss about. He stopped, reading something in her face. What's wrong? Evan tactfully excused himself, leaving them alone among the flowering vines. Did you notice me because of Carmela's challenge? Florence asked without preamble. Jared blinked, clearly surprised by the question. What? At the pack meeting. When you singled me out. When you made your offer. Was it because Carmela had drawn attention to me? Because she'd set up the trial of worth? Jared was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Florence felt her worst fears confirmed. Yes and no, he finally said, and Florence's stomach dropped. I went to your pack meeting specifically because I'd heard about the trial of worth being invoked. It was unusual enough to warrant investigation, so yes, Carmela's actions brought me there. But, Florence started. But, Jared continued firmly. I noticed you because of who you were. Not because of anything Carmela did. I watched you standing at the back of that hall, trying to be invisible, and I recognized something in you that I see in myself. The elders just warned you, didn't they? Told you that you need to prove yourself worthy? Florence nodded mutely. That's what I live with every day, Jared said, moving closer. The constant scrutiny, the assumption that I need to prove my worth over and over again. And when I saw you, this wolf who everyone overlooked, who expected to be dismissed speaking honestly about her fears instead of feeding me comfortable lies. That's what caught my attention. Not Carmela's machinations. You. How do I know you're not just saying what I want to hear? Florence whispered. Jared's jaw clenched. Because unlike most wolves, I don't waste time on pretty lies. If I didn't want you here, I would simply say so. I'm the Alpha King, I don't need to spare anyone's feelings. It was brutally honest, which was somehow exactly what Florence needed to hear. Carmela said you'll get bored with me, Florence admitted. That I'm not interesting enough to hold your attention. Carmela, Jared said flatly, is projecting. She's the one who gets bored with wolves once they stop serving her purposes. Did you know she had 3 previous suitors before Jesse, each one discarded when someone more prestigious came along? Florence shook her head. Her mate bond with Jesse was weak because she never wanted him, she wanted what he represented. Access to certain families, certain connections. Jared took Florence's hands, his golden eyes intense. I'm not bored easily, Florence. I've been surrounded by beautiful, accomplished, politically connected she-wolves my entire life, and not one of them interested me for more than a conversation. You've kept me engaged for days, not because you're damaged or pitiable, but because you're real. Florence wanted to believe him. Wanted to silence Carmela's poisonous words and the elders' warnings and her own persistent doubts. The elders think we'll fail, she said quietly. The elders thought the trials were an inappropriate use of tradition too. And you won all 3, Jared pointed out. Florence, if you're having doubts about this partnership, tell me now. I won't trap you in something you don't want. It's not that I don't want it, Florence said carefully. It's that I'm terrified I'm not enough for it, that everyone's right, and I'm just a nobody who got lucky. Jared pulled her closer, and Florence let herself lean into his solid warmth. Then we'll prove them wrong together. Both of us, the Alpha King everyone expects perfection from, and the wolf everyone underestimated. We'll show them that choice can be just as powerful as fate. Florence tilted her head back to look at him. And if we can't? Then we fail spectacularly, Jared said with a slight smile. But at least we'll fail on our own terms, not because we were too afraid to try. It wasn't the romantic declaration of destined love that Florence had dreamed about as a young wolf. But it was honest, and real, and somehow more valuable because of it. Okay, she said. Let's prove them wrong. Together, Jared confirmed. And as they stood in the garden, two wolves who'd chosen each other despite the world's expectations, Florence felt that unfamiliar warmth in her chest grow stronger. Not a mate bond, but something they were building themselves, piece by piece, choice by choice. Something that might, eventually, be even more powerful than fate. Chapter 10. Building what fate refused to give. The final 3 days of the gathering passed in a whirlwind of formal ceremonies, political negotiations, and endless scrutiny. Florence found herself thrust into a world she'd never imagined inhabiting. Standing beside Jared during pack leader meetings, attending formal dinners where every word was weighed and analyzed, learning to navigate the treacherous waters of pack politics. It was exhausting and terrifying and, surprisingly, exhilarating. "You're a natural," Beta Evan told her on the 4th day as they reviewed treaty documents in the palace library. Jared had asked her to learn the basics of territorial agreements, and Evan had volunteered to teach her. "You see connections others miss. That's a rare gift." Florence looked up from the treaty she'd been studying. "Or maybe I'm just used to being invisible, so I notice things people overlook." Evan smiled. "Whatever the reason, it's valuable." Jared chose well. The words warmed her, but they couldn't completely dispel the constant undercurrent of doubt. Everywhere she went, wolves whispered. Some were supportive young wolves, mostly, who found the idea of choosing your own partner romantic. But others were hostile, particularly the traditional families who saw her partnership with Jared as a dangerous precedent. And then there was Carmela. The golden she-wolf had gone eerily quiet after their confrontation in the corridor. Florence caught glimpses of her during formal events, always surrounded by sympathetic allies, always watching Florence with calculating eyes. Jesse had disappeared entirely. Some said he'd left the gathering early, unable to bear watching his mate pursue another male so publicly. "She's planning something," Sam warned one evening as they walked through the tent city. Sam had been blissfully absorbed in her new mate bond, but she still made time for Florence. "I've heard rumors. Nothing concrete, but..." "Be careful, Flor." "I'm always careful," Florence replied, though unease prickled at the back of her neck. That night, as the moon rose over the valley, Florence couldn't sleep. She slipped out of her tent and wandered toward the standing stones where the mate ceremony had taken place. The area was empty now, peaceful under the stars. She sat on one of the ancient stones and pulled out her grandmother's journal, running her fingers over the worn pages. Her grandmother had found her mate at 19, a whirlwind romance that had lasted 47 years until his death. The journal was filled with their adventures, their struggles, their love. "The mate bond is a gift," her grandmother had written. "But it's not the only path to happiness. I've known wolves with weak bonds who built strong marriages, and wolves with powerful bonds who destroyed each other. The bond is a beginning, not an ending. What you build from it, that's what matters." Florence traced the words with her finger, feeling their truth settle into her bones. She'd been so focused on the absence of a mate bond that she'd never considered what her grandmother was really saying. The bond was a tool, not a destiny. What mattered was the choice to build something real. "I thought I might find you here." Florence looked up to find Jared approaching, his figure silhouetted against the moonlight. He'd shed his formal clothing for simple dark pants and a loose shirt, looking more like a regular wolf than the Alpha King. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her on the stone. "Too much in my head," Florence admitted. She held up the journal, reading my grandmother's words, trying to understand how she made it look so easy. Was it easy for her? Florence flipped to a specific passage. She writes here about the first year of her marriage. How she almost left 3 times because the pressure of being mated to the pack beta was too much. How wolves expected her to be perfect, and she felt like she was failing constantly. She looked at Jared. But she stayed, chose to stay, every day, until one day it wasn't a choice anymore. It was just where she belonged. Jared was quiet for a moment. "I wish I'd known my parents better. They died when I was 12, a rogue attack while defending the border. I was raised by the council, groomed to be Alpha King from that moment on. Sometimes I wonder if they chose each other, or if it was just the bond deciding for them. Does it matter?" Florence asked. I used to think it didn't. But now. He looked at her, his golden eyes reflecting starlight. Now I think maybe it matters more than anything. Because if they chose each other, really chose, then what they had was real. Not just biology, but genuine partnership. Florence set the journal aside. Are you having doubts? About this? About us? No, Jared said firmly. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about the pressure you're under. The elders, the gossip, Carmela's schemes. You didn't sign up for all of this when you agreed to partner with me. Actually, I kind of did, Florence pointed out. You're the Alpha King. The pressure comes with the territory, literally. Despite everything, Jared laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and unguarded, and it made Florence's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. When did you get so pragmatic? He asked. I've had 26 years to develop realistic expectations, Florence said wryly. Though I admit, partner with the Alpha King while everyone questions your worthiness wasn't on my list of likely scenarios. Life has a way of surprising us, Jared agreed. He stood and extended his hand. That now familiar gesture that had changed everything. Dance with me. There's no music, Florence protested, even as she took his hand. Then we'll make our own. He pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, and they swayed gently under the stars. It wasn't the formal dancing of the feast, with its scrutinizing eyes and political implications. This was just two wolves, moving together in comfortable silence, finding their rhythm. I'm glad you chose me, Jared murmured against her hair. Even though it's made your life infinitely more complicated. I'm glad you gave me the option, Florence replied. Even though you could have chosen anyone. I don't want anyone. I want a partner who sees me as Jared, not as the Alpha King. Someone who'll tell me when I'm being an arrogant ass, and won't just agree with everything I say because of my title. Florence pulled back slightly to look at him. You're being a little bit of an arrogant ass right now, actually. Assuming you know what I want or need without asking. Jared blinked, then smiled slowly. See? That's exactly what I mean. Anyone else would have let that pass. You called me on it immediately. Is that really what you want? Someone who challenges you constantly? Yes, Jared said without hesitation. Because I'm surrounded by yes wolves all day, every day. I need at least one person in my life who'll be honest, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Florence studied his face, the strong jaw, the golden eyes that had first noticed her when everyone else looked past her. The slight vulnerability in his expression that he only showed in private moments like this. Okay, she said. Then I'll be honest. I'm terrified that I'm going to fail you, that I'm not strong enough or smart enough or politically savvy enough to be what you need. And I'm terrified, Jared admitted, that you'll wake up one day and realize you settled for me because you thought you had no other options. That you'll resent me for being a choice made from desperation, rather than genuine want. They stared at each other. Their deepest fears laid bare under the stars. Then Florence started laughing. She couldn't help it, the absurdity of two powerful wolves, both terrified of the same thing in different ways, was too much. What's so funny? Jared asked, but he was smiling too. We're both idiots, Florence said. Here we are, trying to build something real, and we're both so busy being afraid of failing that we're forgetting to actually try. So what do? Florence thought of her grandmother's words, of the trials she'd won by refusing to accept impossible choices, of every moment in her life when she'd survived by being pragmatic instead of romantic. We try anyway, she said simply. We wake up each day and choose each other, not because of a bond or because we're afraid to be alone, but because we genuinely want to build this partnership. And maybe some days will be harder than others. Maybe some days we'll question everything. But as long as we keep choosing each other, that's enough. Jared pulled her close again, and this time when they swayed under the stars, it felt less like dancing, and more like a promise being made without words. The next morning brought the gathering's closing ceremony. All the packs would depart over the coming days, returning to their territories with new alliances forged, new mates claimed, and new stories to tell. Florence stood beside Jared on the palace steps, as he delivered his formal farewell to the assembled packs. She wore a dress gifted to her by the palace staff, deep blue embroidered with silver thread, appropriate for her new position as the Alpha King's chosen partner. The crowd below was massive, thousands of wolves gathered to witness the official end of the gathering. Florence's eyes swept the sea of faces, landing briefly on familiar ones. Olive and Daniel, beaming with pride. Sam and her new mate, holding hands. Alpha Scott, looking equal parts stunned and impressed by his formerly overlooked pack member's transformation. And Carmela, standing near the back, her beautiful face a mask of cold hatred. Jared finished his speech a call for unity among the packs, a reminder of the threats they faced from rogue factions, a promise of prosperity if they worked together. The crowd erupted into howls of approval. As the noise died down, Carmela stepped forward. "Alpha King," she called out, her voice magically amplified to carry across the valley. "I invoke the right of challenge." The crowd gasped. Jared's hand found Florence's, squeezing once in warning or support or both. "The right of challenge," Carmela continued, "allows any wolf to question a decision made during the gathering that affects pack law or tradition. I challenge Florence Mesa's right to stand as your partner without a mate bond. I challenge the precedent this sets for future generations. And I demand a formal judgment from the Council of Elders." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some supportive of Carmela, others hostile to her audacity. Florence felt her stomach clench. This was it, Carmela's final play. The Elder Council stepped forward, their ancient faces grave. The head elder spoke. "The right of challenge is recognized. However, Carmela Reynolds, you must present grounds beyond personal grievance. What tradition has been violated? What pack law has been broken?" Carmela's smile was triumphant. "The law of natural order, Elder, which states that leadership positions, including that of the Alpha King's partner, should be held by wolves with proven bonds, ensuring stability and loyalty that cannot be questioned. That law," the head elder said slowly, "refers to pack alphas and their mates, not to the Alpha King's personal partnerships, but the spirit of the law." "The spirit of the law," the elder interrupted, steel entering her ancient voice, "was designed to prevent chaos when leadership is contested. The Alpha King's authority is absolute. His choice of partner, bonded or not, is his alone to make, unless you're questioning his right to rule." It was a trap, and Carmela realized it too late. To question Jared's right to choose his own partner was to question his authority as Alpha King. And that was treason. "No, Elder, I would never." "Then your challenge has no grounds," the elder said flatly. "The right of challenge is denied. And Carmela Reynolds, you are hereby warned. Further attempts to undermine the Alpha King's decisions will be met with exile from the gathering and potential ban from future assemblies. Do you understand?" Carmela's face had gone white with rage and humiliation, but she managed a stiff nod. "I understand, Elder." As she retreated back into the crowd, Florence felt Jared's hand squeeze hers again. "That's probably not the end of it," he murmured. "Probably not," Florence agreed. "But it's a start." The ceremony continued, but Florence barely registered it. She was too busy processing what had just happened. The Elder Council, the same wolves who'd warned her just days ago about the consequences of her choice, had defended her right to stand beside Jared. Maybe, Florence thought, change was possible after all. 2 weeks later, Florence stood in the Alpha King's palace, her home now, watching the last of the gathering tents being dismantled in the valley below. Most packs had departed already, returning to their territories with stories that would be told for generations. The story of the wolf, who won trials through cleverness instead of strength. The story of the Alpha King who chose a partner without a mate bond. The story of tradition challenged and, perhaps, changed forever. "Still watching?" Jared's voice came from behind her. Florence turned to find him entering the room, Robbie trailing behind like an enthusiastic shadow. The young wolf had adapted quickly to his new life, though he still sometimes looked around like he expected it all to disappear. "Just thinking," Florence said. About how none of this was what I expected. I came to the gathering hoping to find my mate, to feel that bond I'd waited for my entire life. Instead, I found something different. Something I chose rather than something fate chose for me." Jared moved to stand beside her at the window. "Regrets?" Florence thought about it, really thought about it. About the scrutiny she faced daily. The wolves who still whispered about her lack of a bond. The responsibility of standing beside the Alpha King. About Carmela's ongoing resentment, and the political complexities she was only beginning to understand. And she thought about Jared's steady presence, his respect for her opinions, the way he made her feel seen and valued. About Robbie's rescued smile, and Sam's happiness, and the knowledge that she'd proven herself through her own merit rather than inherited status. "No," Florence said honestly. "No regrets. It's harder than I imagined, but also more real. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Jared replied. He glanced at Robbie. "Why don't you go find Beta Evan? Tell him I said you're ready to start training with the younger wolves." Robbie's face lit up. "Really? You mean it?" "Would I say it if I didn't mean it?" Jared asked with mock severity. The boy laughed and scampered off, leaving them alone. "He's doing well," Florence observed. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't fought for him during that trial." Jared shook his head. "I would have followed the law, Florence. Would have let the exile happen because that's what tradition demanded. But you refused to accept impossible choices. You found another way." "We found another way," Florence corrected. "Together." "Together," Jared agreed. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "Florence Mesa, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. Or maybe it is. I'm not sure." He took a breath. "When I first offered you partnership, it was exactly what I said, a practical arrangement. Companionship without the pressure of a bond. A solution to loneliness for both of us." "I remember," Florence said quietly. "But these past 2 weeks, watching you navigate this new world, seeing how you handle pressure and politics and Carmela's schemes, Florence, it's not practical anymore. At least not for me." Florence's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm falling for you," Jared said, his golden eyes intense. "Not because of fate, or bonds, or desperation, but because of who you are, your honesty, your strength, your refusal to accept the world's limitations. And I need you to know that, even though it changes nothing about our agreement, you're free to keep this as a practical partnership. I won't pressure you for more." Florence stared at him, her mind spinning. She thought about the past weeks, the late nights discussing pack politics, the quiet moments in the gardens, the way he made her laugh when she was overwhelmed, the way she found herself looking for him in crowded rooms, the relief she felt when he was near. "What if," Florence said slowly, "I'm falling for you too?" Hope flashed in Jared's eyes. "Then maybe we're building something even better than a mate bond. Something we chose. Something we created together from nothing but mutual respect and genuine affection." "It won't be easy," Florence warned. "There will always be wolves who question us, who say we're going against natural order." "Let them question," Jared said, pulling her closer. "We'll prove them wrong. Every single day, we'll prove them wrong by choosing each other." Florence looked up at him, this wolf who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd extended his hand and offered her a choice when no one else had. And she realized that maybe the moon goddess had known exactly what she was doing when she didn't give Florence a mate bond. Because some things were more powerful when you chose them yourself. "Yes," Florence said, "let's prove them wrong together." And when Jared kissed her, gentle and sure, Florence felt something click into place in her chest. Not a mate bond, she would never have that particular gift. But something just as real, just as powerful, just as permanent. The feeling of finally, truly, belonging. Epilogue. 1 year later. The next gathering wouldn't happen for 4 more years, but the stories from this one had already spread throughout all the territories. Young wolves spoke about the trials won through cleverness. Unmated wolves found hope in the possibility of choice, rather than waiting endlessly for fate. And the traditionalists. Well, they grumbled, but even they couldn't deny that the Alpha King's partnership seemed to be working. Florence stood in the council chamber, reviewing border agreements with Beta Evan while Jared met with visiting pack leaders. She'd grown into her role as the Alpha King's partner not through any magical transformation, but through steady work and stubborn determination to prove she belonged. Robbie, now 14 and thriving, had become a bridge between the palace and the younger wolves, his rescued orphan story inspiring others who felt overlooked or unwanted. He trained hard, studied diligently, and occasionally still had nightmares about the trial, but he was healing. Sam visited frequently with her mate, and their friendship had only strengthened. Olive and Daniel had welcomed a pup 3 months ago, a healthy boy with his father's gentle eyes. And Carmela? She'd eventually found a mate at a smaller gathering in the Southern Territories. A powerful alpha who valued beauty over substance. They seemed happy, or at least content, though Jesse had never forgiven her for abandoning their bond so publicly. "Florence?" Jared's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, a slight smile on his face. "The pack leaders want to meet you. They've heard stories, but they want to see for themselves the wolf who beat Carmela Reynolds in the trial of Worth." Florence set down her papers and stood, smoothing her dress. A year ago, the thought of meeting powerful pack leaders would have terrified her. Now it was just part of her daily routine. "How do I look?" she asked. Jared crossed the room and took her hands, his golden eyes warm. Like someone who deserves to be here. Like someone who earned her place through merit rather than fate. Like my partner, not your mate, Florence said, not sadly, just stating a fact they both accepted. Better than a mate, Jared replied. My choice. Every single day. You're my choice. Florence squeezed his hands. And you're mine. They walked to the meeting together, hand in hand, two wolves who'd defied tradition and found something real in the process. Behind them, the palace hummed with life wolves who'd learned that sometimes the strongest bonds were the ones you built yourself. Choice by choice. Day by day. Florence had come to the gathering watching everyone else find their mates, feeling alone even in a crowd. She'd left with a partnership, a purpose, and the knowledge that fate was only one path to happiness. Sometimes, the moon goddess's greatest gift wasn't a mate bond at all. Sometimes it was the freedom to choose your own destiny, and in choosing, to find exactly what you needed. I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in Florence's journey? The trials, the choice, the ending? Drop a comment, and let's talk about it. And if you stayed until the very end of this story, you're my kind of person. Hit that like button, so I know you're here, and I'll keep bringing you stories worth your time.